bring the special assembly meeting to order for April 30th, 2025. Mr. Steininger, will you read the land acknowledgement, please?
We would like to acknowledge that the City and Borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gugus Chish.
Thank you, Mr. Steininger. Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Bryson?
Present.
Ms. Hughes-Gandes? Absent. Ms. Atkinson?
Here.
Ms. Wall?
Present. And I believe Ms. Hughes-Gandes is here if you marked her absent.
Oh, is she here? I didn't hear her say yes, so.
And Ms. Wall, just so you know, you're in and out of freezing. So.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Ms. Hall?
Here.
Mr. Steininger?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Smith?
Here.
And Mayor Weldon.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Should we get everybody? Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager, is there any request for agenda changes?
No.
Public participation on non-agenda items. I think the first one is a non-agenda item. Mr. Redekop? You just put wages, so I'll let you talk now because I'm not sure which one you're referring to. So please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name's Nathan Redekop. I live in 4128 Butch Lane in the valley. I guess my main concern with this upcoming taxes, or the mill rate was going to go up, it's definitely going to put the hurt on the younger generation, but coming up to the workforce. And the wages, what we have right now, are not comparable to keep, a good workforce. It's sad to see that we haven't kept up with the workforce, labor, and the inflation in general. I mean, and we all understand what the city's got to do. And I'm appreciative because I work for the city too, but I'm just worried about the upcoming workforce. We ain't gonna get qualified people coming up to train or whatever. And that's all I got.
All right, any questions for Mr. Redekop? Thank you for your testimony today. Any more public have any participation on non-agenda items? Seeing none, we'll go to the consent agenda. Is there a public request for consent changes other than ordinances for introduction? Seeing none, is there any assembly requests for consent agenda changes? Seeing none, we'll go to assembly action. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the consent agenda. I move to approve the consent agenda as presented and ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any objection? Seeing none, so moved. That brings us to public hearing, item 3. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ordinance 2025-03, an ordinance establishing the rate of levy for property taxes for calendar year 2025 based upon the proposed budget for fiscal year 2026.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance establishes the mill rates for property taxes for 2025, which funds a significant portion of the City and Borough of Juneau's FY26 operating budget. The charter requires the Assembly to adopt, by ordinance, the tax levies necessary to fund the budget before June 15. The mill levies presented in this ordinance support the manager's FY26 revised budget that will be reviewed by the Assembly Finance Committee. As part of the budget review process, the AFC reviews, amends, and recommends to the Assembly the final mill levies. For FY26, the operating mill rate is proposed to increase 0.15 mils for a total proposed mill levy of 10.19 mils, the components of which are area-wide 6.35, an increase of 0.15 from FY25 adopted. Roaded service area 2.45, flat from FY25 adopted. Fire service area 0.31, flat from FY25 adopted. Debt service 1.08, flat from FY25 adopted. Total FY26 proposed mill rate 10.19, again an increase of 0.15 from FY25 adopted. An additional opportunity for public comment on the proposed mill rate will be provided during the special assembly meeting on April 30th, 2025. I recommend you hold the charter-required public hearing for this ordinance, followed by referral back to the Assembly Finance Committee for further review.
Thank you, Madam Manager. And since it's getting reported a little bit differently, this is, again, the proposed budget. This is, the Assembly has not done anything to the mill rate yet, so this is not the final mill rate. This is, we are required by charter to hold a public hearing before we do our work. So with that, is there any other member beside Mr. Redekop, who obviously spoke to this, wanting to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the Assembly. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move we hold a public hearing for this ordinance and then refer it back to the Assembly Finance Committee for further review, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that ordinance passes. Could we not see Ms. Hughes Candies at all? Okay, there she is. Any objection, Ms. Hughes Candies?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, item 4, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ordinance 2025-02, an ordinance appropriating funds from the Treasury for FY26 school district operations.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance will appropriate to the school district an FY26 operating budget of $94,977,500. This is an overall increase in the budget of $9,580,100 from the FY25 amended budget. The FY26 school budget is supported with a combination of funding sources, including CBJ local funding of $37,044,700 and state and federal funding of $49,011,800. The local funding consists of $35,004,700 for general operations and $2,040,000 for programs and activities not subject to the state funding cap. State statute requires the Assembly to determine the total amount of local education funding support to be provided and provide notification of the support to the school board within 30 days of the school district's budget submission. To meet this timing provision, it is necessary for the Assembly to determine the amount of funding and provide notice in the month of April. This amount cannot subsequently be reduced unless the amount exceeds the state funding cap, but it can be increased. If the Assembly does not set the amount and furnish the school board with notice within 30 days, the amount requested by the school district is automatically approved. By charter, the Assembly is required to appropriate the school district's budget no later than May 31st, 2025. On April 30th, 2025, a meeting is scheduled for the Assembly to state by motion the amount of local funding to be provided to the school district. I recommend holding the charter-required public hearing for this ordinance, followed by a motion to set the amount of minimum local funding to be provided to the school district, and then referral of the ordinance back to the Assembly Finance Committee for additional review.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the Assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move to set the amount of local funding to the school district operations at $35,004,700, which is funding to the cap, and refer ordinance 2025-02 back to the Assembly Finance Committee for further review and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objections? Now we've lost Ms. Wall. Is she trying to get back in? So for those who don't know,
He's there.
okay, you want to bring Ms. Wall back in? Mr. Smith?
Sorry, just to object for 1 second. Mr. Bryce, would you read the number you just stated?
$35,004,700.
All right, well, I don't see Ms. Wall yet, so,
Madam Mayor, I believe she's here. She just has her camera off and so she's within the meeting, I believe, but her camera is off.
okay, thank you for that. I'm assuming since she's no making indication, she doesn't have an objection. So with that, that motion passes. Next, item 5, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ordinance 2025-01, an ordinance appropriating funds from the Treasury for FY26 city and borough operations.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance appropriates $536,715,800 in expenditure authority for the City and Borough of Juneau's FY26 operating budget, excluding the school district. This ordinance appropriates all transfers between funds that support operations, debt service, and capital projects, as well as the associated expenditures within the funds themselves. This ordinance also recognizes $517,079,600 of forecast revenue and transfers in and decreases fund balances across all funds by $19,636,200. The forecast revenue and draw from fund balance are sufficient to fund the budgeted expenditures. Budgeted expenditures and revenues will be reviewed in detail with Finance Committee during the budget process in April and May. Charter requires that a public hearing be held on the FY26 operating budget by May 1, 2025, and the ordinance adopted by June 15, 2025. I recommend holding the charter-required public hearing for this ordinance, followed by referral back to the Assembly Finance Committee for further review.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Is there any member of the public who wishes to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll move it to the Assembly. Mr. Steininger.
I move that the Assembly refer ordinance 2025-01 to the Assembly Finance Committee for further review.
Thank you, Mr. Steininger. Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. Item 6, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Resolution 3090, a resolution adopting the City and Borough Capital Improvement Program for fiscal years 2026 through 2031 and establishing the capital improvement project priorities for fiscal year 2026.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This resolution would adopt the capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2026 through 2031 as required by Charter Section 9.4 and list the capital projects that will be initially appropriated by ordinance in FY26. Public Works and Facilities Committee reviewed the preliminary CIP at its March 17, 2025 meeting and forwarded the plan to the Assembly. I recommend holding the charter-required public hearing for this resolution, followed by referral back to the Assembly Finance Committee for further review.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the Assembly. Ms. Hall.
I move resolution 3090, and recommend holding, let's see. Sorry, I move resolution 3090, referred back to the Assembly Finance Committee for further review and ask for unanimous consent. Sorry, 3090A.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. So just a reminder to the public listening here, this is the proposed so far. We have not done our work, and there will also be other opportunities to do public comment. And you can send emails to us at any time, but there will be other opportunities to do public comment on these. So with that, we are adjourned.
to call the Assembly Finance Committee meeting to order for April 30th. It's about 5 minutes before 6 o'clock. Ms. Wendell, will you call the roll?
Thank you, Chair Bryson. We have all Assembly members present in chambers, besides Assembly members Hughes, Standys, Kelly, and Wool, who are available on Zoom.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Wendell. Were there any requests to requests for changes to the minutes of April 16th, 2025? Seeing no objections, those minutes are approved. Before we dive into agenda topics, I did want to let the audience know that if you're here for Assembly grants and community requests, that we will start that portion of the meeting at 7:30. We have to discuss utility bonds and utility rates and bonds and seasonal sales tax first for anybody that's paying attention right now. And so that will take us to agenda topic 2, utility rates and bonds. Ms. Flick or Ms. Kester?
Thank you, Chair Bryson. So I just want to set up a little bit the cadence of tonight's conversation. First, you're going to have a presentation, an updated analysis by FCS and Paul Quinn, who is the consultant that the utility hired to look at the rates and has kind of been working with us from the last year. Then I will walk you through the memo that I have in the packet starting on page 11 and really explain each one of those sections. It's my hope that the presentation will help and then my explanation will cement it. I only say this because it really took me the presentation and reading the slides over and over again and spending hours trying to consolidate it to get it right in my own head. So I'm hopeful that I can bring you there. Ideally, you would get to a rate recommendation this evening that can then travel with the budget cycle. You may not get there. I am prepared to kind of prompt you with some choose your own adventure questions on rate increases if you can't easily get there. But I just wanted to let you know that that's kind of the 3-part process of the utility rate increase conversation. In many ways, this is the road meets the road conversation that you've been doing so much pre-work for. So with all of that, I'd be happy to hand it over to Paul Quinn.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Please begin.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Let me get my screen shared, and we'll start the presentation. All right, again, thanks for having me. Again, I'm here to present some updated findings on the water and wastewater study efforts. Quick agenda before we get going. We're going to go over a quick background of where we are and how we got to where we are today. I want to mention some of the key changes that we've brought into the analysis in terms of the updates. A refresher on the capital plan that we're baking into the analysis. And then we'll spend some time going through the results for both water and wastewater and open up for your all questions or any comments or discussion. So in terms of where we got to where we are today, the city has been working with the Utility Advisory Board as early as December 2022, discussing the rate path going forward. City staff has also made some presentations to you all or some other committees, other assembly members throughout 2023. I came in about a year ago in March 2024 to start off the study efforts. I did a couple of presentations toward the end of last year. So the table below is really summarizing the proposed rate increases under the 2 scenario options that we brought forward last fall. The 2 scenarios were what if we cash finance the capital program through rate increases or existing reserves, or what if we introduce a little bit of state loans to help mitigate some of the near-term rate pressure. So since that time, we decided, since it's been over a year, that we should update the numbers, the analysis to reflect the latest actuals, the latest operating environment that the utilities are in. The table in this slide summarizes some of the key changes that have been input that have changed the numbers for both the water and wastewater utilities. Overall, what we're seeing is there was a net positive in terms of the changes and the potential reduction to rate pressures from what we presented in the fall. In this table, the black numbers represent good changes. So those are changes that can help mitigate the rate pressures that we saw in the fall. Red numbers are going the opposite. So those are additional pressures that the utility is facing that were not baked into the analysis that was presented last year. As a refresher on the capital plan, there were 3 different plans developed for the next 5 or 6 year period. These plans were developed in conjunction with city staff, as well as an engineering consultant, Dow Consulting. The 3 plans, the reduced, moderate, and extensive, represent different amounts of capital projects. The extensive plan represents all of the capital projects that were identified that need to get done at some point for the utility. The projects were ranked based on how well they addressed system vulnerabilities while minimizing the consequences to the community. So moderate or high ranked projects kind of fell in that moderate CIP. The reduced CIP includes just the highest ranked, the most critical projects that are needed to move forward and continue providing utility service. The reduced plan is what we discussed during the fall. It's what's baked into the numbers today and what we're going to be discussing scenarios around. It's important to note that under the reduced plan, there is a risk to utility service, but utility staff does feel comfortable moving forward with this level of capital spend. So that leads us to the results. We're going to start with the water utility, and we're going to start with a slide representing the operating revenues and expenses for the utility. In this graphic, the bars, the blue and orange bars, represent our expenses. Blue is our operating expenses. Orange is our existing annual debt service repayments. The solid black line represents our total operating revenue coming in before we make any sort of rate adjustments. You will notice that we are anticipating a slight dip in 2027 as we're anticipating earnings, interest earned on unused fund balances to decline. Key point on this slide, though, is you do see the gap between our expenses, the bars, or our revenues, the line. On average, that gap is equal to about $2 million per year. What that means is the utility is generating some additional cash flow each year that it can then use to fund part of the capital program. So again, what the water utility, the findings show is that we are generating about $2 million on average during the study period that we can use to fund the capital program. When we actually look at the capital program represented in this graphic, we're looking at about $26 million in total for the water utility. That represents just over $4 million on average in terms of capital that the enterprise fund is responsible for. So again, in the last slide, we're bringing in about $2 million per year on average. But when we get to the capital spending plan, we need to spend about $4 million on average. So that $2 million deficit is what we're building scenarios on, is what we're trying to solve through potential rate adjustments or debt issuances or other funding sources. It is important to note that this is that reduced spending plan. Under this option, we are deferring about 90% of the identified capital project costs outside of this study period to be dealt with at a later time. So in terms of the scenarios that we're going to...
Just one, please. Madam Mayor, do you have a question?
I do have a question, and I don't know if this is for Mr. Quinn or city manager or even Mrs. Koch. I'm not quite understand, I don't know if the public, how did we get here? Because I know we had 10 years without any kind of rate increase, but we've been increasing our rates, utility rates, for quite some time. So I guess that's my question. How did we end up in this position?
Sure. So I believe the last rate study that was performed from an outside entity was performed about 10 or 11 years ago. They provided you all, or the utilities, with a plan of attack in terms of what rate increases needed to be. If my memory serves me correct, the increases were, I think it was 8% per year on the sewer utility, per year for the 10 years, and then 6% per year for the 10 years on the water side. So those 6 and 8% were followed for the first 4 or 5 years of the 10-year forecast. But starting around 2020, the decision was made to lower the rate increases to kind of help our constituents with rising costs. So instead of the 6 and 8s, we move forward with 2% per year over the next 4 or 5 years. So in terms of the last 10 years, we were keeping forward or moving forward with the rate adjustments over the first 5. But over the past 5 or 6 years, we have increased rates lower than what inflation has done, what our costs have done for the utility.
Mayor Weldon.
Okay, that makes sense to me, but what doesn't make sense to me is all of a sudden, so we were a little shy on the rates for a couple of years, and all of a sudden we have $185 million deferred. The jump doesn't make sense, so I guess it goes back to maybe it's a physical thing. Are all of our systems failing at once? That's what I guess more of a heart of my question is.
Mr. Quinn.
Yeah, and I might defer questions on the capital to Superintendent McGuire.
Superintendent McGuire, would you like to come join us, sir?
The manager can.
Oh, Madam Manager instead.
I just would also like to point out that the last 5-year period, we had a $15 million investment through the 1% in capital spend. So because then we didn't renew that capital spend, we kind of already started behind from that perspective. We also didn't keep up with inflation. Inflation has been very steep over the last 5 years, and I do have a slide that I can pull out of my pocket when it becomes my turn, and I'll let Superintendent McGuire talk about the kind of state of our utility and all declining kind of at once because of the age of our systems.
Superintendent McGuire.
Thank you, Chair. I guess the question about the deferring starts, there's a number of details, but to start with, the infrastructure, as we've talked about, is pretty old. Most of the sewer infrastructure in the U.S. was started after 1973 when the Clean Water Act was passed. Most of the water and wastewater plants were started, and our infrastructure is really no different. That's when the Juneau Douglas wastewater treatment plant was constructed in 1974. The plant in the valley also started up around then and was constructed, but also was, I guess, upgraded in the 80s. So most of our infrastructure is indicative of that, around 40 or 50 years old. So the number as far as deferral you see out there, you'll see one on the wastewater one as well. The 6-year CIP plan that we publish every year has a large amount of projects, really identifying everything that we think we need and are aware of based on age or based on performance and things of that nature. The deferral refers to the difference in the capital cost that we decided to try to fund in this scenario. It's the difference between the full 6-year plan and a very small subset of projects that we deem to be the most important.
Deputy Mayor Smith, did you have a question as well, sir?
Mine was answered in this course of conversation. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions from the body at this time? Mr. Steiniger.
This is for Mr. Quinn. You mentioned that part of the reason that we're in this problem is we have been recommended increases of, I think you said, 8% and 6% a year for a 10-year period, but midway through that period, we went to 2%. If we had followed those 8 and 6% increases year over year, would the rates today or for fiscal year 26, how close would they be to the rates that are proposed under this plan here? So like, have we continued to increase them at the rate that we should have or we're recommended to? Are we, if we implement a 11% rate increase, are we still below that level that we would have gotten to had we followed that plan? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, sure. So if the utilities had followed the plan, the 6s and 8s, we would be looking at a more of a inflationary type increase under this type of capital spending projection.
Additional questions? Mr. Quinn, you may continue.
Thank you. So to talk a little bit about the options that we're bringing forward for your attention, there's 4 different scenarios we're going to be talking about tonight. The first 2 are the same 2 scenarios that we talked about last fall, just updated for the new numbers. So again, scenario one, we're going to completely fund the capital program through rate adjustments or existing reserves. Scenario two, we're going to borrow some state revolving funds, about $4.5 million over the rate study period. That's equal to about 20% of the 26 through 30 capital program. That'll help alleviate some of the near-term rate pressure. The reason we're looking at 20% and not something greater than that, with the state revolving fund loans, the more you borrow, the more requirements that you have to follow. There could be materials that you need to source from the United States or things that need to be built within the United States. So costs can rise on capital projects. The more you want to fund through the state loans at the 20% level, we feel confident that our costs wouldn't rise more than what we're forecasting there. Scenarios 3 and 4, we're going to cap annual rate increases at 5% per year. The question then is how much additional funding are we going to need, either through the state funds or really through outside funding sources in order to make those 5% increases work. So on this next slide here, I know there's a lot of numbers, but we'll walk through it together. I'm showing you some comparisons across the 4 scenarios. The top table represents the proposed annual increases that we discussed last fall. So 10.25% per year under the cash financing option, or 7% per year if the utility were to borrow a little bit of state loans. With the updated numbers, again, it was a slight positive for the water utility. We're able to reduce those adjustments by about 1% per year. That allows us to, knock it down below double digits. It's still quite an increase. So scenario 1, 9.25% per year. Scenario 2, 6% per year with the debt. Scenario 3 and 4, again, we're capping increases at 5%. The ability to do so is contingent on the utilities receiving some sort of other funding source. That bottom table shows you the amount of outside funding that the water utility would need in order to keep the rate increases at 5%. So in scenario 3, where we're going to try and cash finance the utility under the 5% option, the utility would need about $4.3 million in additional funding coming from somewhere else in order to make that math work. If the utility is able to secure some state loans, and we also want to cap increases at 5%, the utility would need about $900,000 in other funding sources. Now, these funding sources could come from, other areas. A couple ideas have been thrown around, maybe a new bond that'll be funded through property taxes, maybe an allocation of the 3% sales tax, an allocation of the 1% sales tax. Could be a combination of different funding sources. But what we're here to tell you today is essentially how much money would the utility need under a 5% scenario going forward. It is important to note that in scenario 2 and 4, we are issuing the state loans. There is some annual debt service that is required under those loans. We are assuming a 20-year term at a 2.75% interest rate. So the utility would be on the hook for those debt repayments over the next 20 years. Also want to point out under scenario 3 and 4, we are capping the increases at 5%. The utilities are relying on some sort of other funding sources. If we look beyond the 2030 picture, if we want to move forward with 5%, once we get to 2031, the utility is still going to be dependent on other funding sources in order to make the math work until rates are adjusted high enough where the funds can support themselves. So in terms of impacts, these increases will apply to all customers. Most of our customers are on a flat rate. The current flat rate for the water customer is just under $41. I did want to show you the impacts for a typical customer. That table below shows you the monthly increases that a customer under the flat water rate would see on their bill. So we're looking at anywhere from a $2 increase per month to about a $5.40 increase per month, depending on which scenario we're looking at or which year we're looking at. So that brings us to the wastewater utility. Again, we're going to start with the operating picture. So how are we able to, are we able to pay for our operating expenses or debt service through existing rates? Again, the bars here represent our operating expenses or debt service. The solid black line is our operating revenues before any rate adjustments. Just like the water utility, we're anticipating a slight dip in revenues as interest earned on unused fund balances declines over time. So what we're seeing in the wastewater utility, unlike the water utility, is there's a gap that exists between the revenues and our expenses in years 1 through 3. But starting in 2028, we are projecting that our expenses or existing debt service would be higher than the amount of annual operating revenue we're bringing in. In other words, the utility is projected to enter an operating deficit in 2028. That means the utility would not be generating any cash flow that could be used to fund the capital program. It would also mean the utility would have to draw down from existing reserves to fully pay for debt service or associated operating expenses. When we look at the capital plan, it's about $39 million in total for the wastewater utility under the reduced plan. In terms of the average spend rate for the enterprise fund, that's just below $5 million per year. Again, as we saw in the last slide, we are generating a little bit of cash flow today that we can fund capital, but starting in 2 to 3 years, we're forecasting that cash flow to go away without any rate adjustments. We need $5 million, on average per year to make sure we get the capital funded. So just like the water utility, the main driver for increases on the wastewater side is the capital spending and making sure we're bringing in enough money so that we can get things funded on time. We're going to present the same 4 options that we did on water. So scenarios 1 and 2 are the same scenarios presented last fall, just updated with the new numbers. Scenarios 3 and 4, we're capping rate adjustments at 5%, and we're determining how much additional funding would the utility need from some other funding source in order to keep those rate adjustments at that 5% level. So that top table there represents the proposed adjustments we brought forward last fall. The cash funding option was, between 12 and 13%, depending on the year. By introducing a little bit of state loan funding, we're able to buy those down to 11 to 12% per year, depending on the year. With the updated numbers that we've included in the analysis, we're able to bring those percentages down by about 3% per year. So a little bit of a bigger impact on the wastewater side from updating the analysis. So under the updated cash funding option, we're able to avoid a double-digit increase. We're about 9 3/4 to start off, and then 9 1/4 thereafter. By issuing close to $5 million of state loans, we're able to move forward with 8 1/4 per year, and then 7 3/4 thereafter. Scenarios 3 and 4, we're capping those increases at 5%. The ability to do that is contingent on receiving some sort of funding source to help us fund that capital program. Under scenario 3, where we're going to fund as much as we can through the rate adjustments of 5%, the wastewater utility would need about $12.4 million in some other funding source, beginning in 2028 to make those 5% work. If the utility is also able to secure some low-cost state loans, that number drops to about $8.5 million in terms of the other funding needed for the 5% scenario. Just like on water, what is the impact for a typical customer who's paying the flat rate of about $106?
Pause for one moment, Mr. Quinn.
Mm-hmm.
Deputy Mayor Smith, did I see you raise your hand?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Quinn, thank you. You said, is the state loan, is that capped at 20% of a capital plan, or is that, I guess, where did the 4.8 million come from?
Mr.
Sure.
Quinn.
So, yep. It's not capped at 20%. You can fund more than 20% of a project cost through state loans. The issue is once you reach a certain threshold, or start funding a certain portion of the project, construction costs versus design or engineering, you're required to source materials that are made in America. You're required to source labor from America. So you're not really able to source the lowest cost materials that you might be able to if you're you funding through rates or funding through, a revenue bond, that is where that 20% cap comes from.
Follow up, Mr. Smith?
Actually, a separate one, if that's okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Mr. Quinn, sorry, back on slide 25. Anyway, in the bar graph with the revenue line, the existing debt, the 1.2, 1.4 million, where did that come from? Was that from previous assemblies, maybe considering what we're considering tonight?
Mr. Quinn?
Yeah, so I don't know where it came from. Let me look at this. There are a couple of Department of Ecology loans that the sewer utility is repaying. It looks like there might be 7 of them, 6 or 7 at the moment. So that 1.4 million is the sum total of those 6 loans. I don't know off the top of my head when these loans were issued in terms of what point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Do we have the answer in the room? Ms. Flick?
Thank you, Chair Bryson. Deputy Mayor Smith, those are DEC loans primarily that had been taken out in the past. The stories behind them, I don't necessarily have at my fingertips, but I'd be happy to pull together a list of them and when they were taken out, if that's helpful.
Satisfactory, Mr. Smith? All right. Mr. Quinn, it sounded like you were getting towards the end there. You go ahead and wrap this up for us, sir.
Sure. So again, the bottom table represents the additional outside funding required to keep the 5% scenarios going forward. Impact to a typical flat rate customer, we're looking at anywhere from $5.30 to a little over $14 in terms of the monthly increase per year under these scenarios. Just like the water utility, these increases would apply to all customers. It's not just the flat rate residential customers who are seeing an increase. This is all customers in the system who would be proportionally impacted. So before we end, a couple of topics. I wanted to highlight the other funding sources. Again, if we want to keep rates at 5% under both utilities, we're going to need some sort of other funding sources that to offset some of the capital program needs. For water, we're looking at between $900,000 under the state loan scenario or about $4.3 million without those state loans. For wastewater, it would be between $8.5 and $12.4 million. In other words, the cash funding option, we would need just shy of $17 million total for both utilities. For the scenario 4 with the state loans, we're looking at about $9.4 million in total for both utilities. We are not anticipating a need in the next 2 years for outside funding sources under these scenarios. The need arises in 2028. The utilities can always get cash earlier than that, but we cannot receive cash later than identified without, shifting projects around or moving costs. These funding sources, there's been a couple ideas thrown around in terms of maybe a new bond funded by property taxes, an allocation of the 3% or 1% sales tax. The 1% sales tax, my understanding, that wouldn't be available until fiscal year 29. There could be some sort of other funding available, or we could do some sort of combination, of 2, 3, or 4 of these to make the numbers work. This table here represents the combined impact for a flat rate residential customer. They're paying about $147 per month. We'd be looking at a $7.30 increase per month to about a $19.50 increase per month, depending on which scenario we decide to move forward with. I wanted to bring back the rate benchmarking. These are the existing rates. So you'll see your flat rate customers are, in the middle of the pack of those jurisdictions surveyed. We've talked about this briefly, but a lot of the communities in the area have that 301H waiver designation. That means they are exempt from certain secondary sewer treatment processes. That translates to lower operating costs. That translates to lower capital investments needed. So for those 301H waiver communities, I would expect them to have lower operating costs for their sewer utility. The rates do suggest that for those communities. When you look at the water side, your water rate is one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest in the area, compared to the folks surveyed. So before I conclude, the tables here show you the proposed annual adjustments by scenario for each utility. Wanted to stress again that these increases apply to all customers of the system. All customers would be impacted proportionally. And at that point in time, I'd like to conclude the presentation and open it up for any questions or comments that you might have.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Quinn. Questions from the committee? Deputy Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just to confirm, I think I'm there. All four scenarios provide the balance between like operating, all four scenarios, I guess, cover operating expenses as well as input into the system the reduced capital plan for both utilities. Is that correct? Like all of these numbers essentially get to the same place.
Yeah, that is exactly correct. So under all these scenarios, we'd be able to fund our operating expenses, repay debt service, and build the capital projects under that reduced plan.
I'm not able to see the people online right now. Could we maybe stop sharing the screen and see if anyone joining us online has any questions? Deputy Mayor Smith, then.
Thanks. This one maybe for staff. If we were to issue GO bond at like today and whatever, someone votes on it soon and we issue it, what rate, what interest rate would we be paying?
Ms. Flick.
Thank you, Chair Bryson and Deputy Mayor Smith. The way we have structured bonds typically is paying 5% on to the investor. And if that is a good rate in the investment community, people pay more for the bonds than the issued amount. And so you end up selling $1 million bond for $1.2 million. And so the extra amount helps you offset those interest rates in the future. Super complicated, but roughly we pay about 5%. If you're asking, are GO bonds better than DEC loans? The interest rate on the DEC loans are generally more favorable than we can get in the market, but the DEC loans have to be repaid by the enterprise, whereas a general obligation bond is paid by the general property tax.
Thank you for that, Ms. Flick. We're going to go to Ms. Wool.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We have you loud and clear, ma'am.
Okay, my internet has been going from very good to not very good rapidly, so I'll take advantage of this moment. And as a result, I did miss some of your presentation, Mr. Quinn, so I apologize if this was covered, but I think one of the challenges of thinking about debt funding is, it makes sense if we are catching up on a bunch of needs that we have not been paying for years and years and years, but it makes at least less sense to me if, we're going to continue to need, ways to find funding that cover, a lot of projects that are still on wouldn't be covered by kind of normal inflationary increases. So I know we've talked about like what happens after these 5 years, would this scenario put us back in a place where we could just be looking at inflationary increases, or would we need take on more debt in the future, potentially?
Thank you, Ms. Wool. Mr. Quinn.
Yeah, so in terms of what happens after fiscal year 2030, it does depend on which scenario, 1, 2, 3, or 4, we would move forward with. Some of the scenarios we would end up, we could move forward with inflationary type adjustments after 2030. Some of them we would require, higher single-digit increases per year in order to keep up with the spending plan. And for that look, what I assumed is a similar spending amount in the reduced plan. That is a very hard question. We don't necessarily have a concrete capital plan after 2030 at this point in time. So it's a kind of remains unknown if we're able to spend at the lower spend rate in 2031 and beyond, or if that would need to pick up at all.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel like I'm pretty familiar with it, but I just want to verify, we've said a couple of times of if we could secure some state debt, but we've received that multiple times in the past. I just want to get I guess, verbal confirmation that in general, those funds are generally a bit of a lock.
Is that, Ms. Hughes Candies, could you repeat that last question?
Yeah, I'm asking for verbal confirmation. I think I know the answer, but I'm asking for verbal confirmation. It's been phrased as if we could secure this, if we could get this kind of debt funding. But we fully 100% expect to be able to get that 4 million-ish from SRF funds, correct?
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. I believe this is Ms. Kester has the answer.
You are correct, Assemblymember Hughes Candies. We have no reason to believe that SRF fund will be in jeopardy. As Superintendent McGuire mentioned, we are not alone in our aging infrastructure and our need to rely on debt. In fact, we have a lot of communities in Alaska are potentially looking at much more consequential decisions if they are required to go to secondary treatment. It's also very common to use a lot more debt than we do as a utility, a lot more state revolving loan fund debt. And all that is with a qualifier that we seem to be living in unprecedented times when it comes to federal funding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kester. And Ms. Hughes Candies, is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Madam Mayor.
I'll find the squirrel. Since our 1.6 million guests this summer do put a strain on our sewer, some of our water, mainly our sewer, is there any way we can use marine passenger fees for any of this?
Who's that question for, Director? Manager Kester.
I guess I will say that we already have our cruise ship passengers our cruise ship customers are our highest paying customers. So they contribute significantly to the sewer utility and the water utility at the highest rates. They're also interruptible customers, so we never guarantee that we can handle their waste because we don't want to have to like increase our costs and push us into violations. We also, when appropriate, do capital project costs with passenger fees. So I believe it might be in this year's budget cycle, there's passenger fees for the Juneau Douglas treatment plant because that is the plant that handles that waste. So I think, from our perspective, we really do capitalize on our visitors for their contributions.
All right, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Kester. Deputy Mayor Smith, did I see you have a last question? All right. Seeing no questions, Mr. Quinn, thank you for presenting this awesome material, and then we'll get into the assembly discussion. Thank you again, Mr. Quinn.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Manager Kester.
Thank you. So without repeating everything that Mr. Quinn said, I would like to go over the memo included in your packet just to provide you some context of how both we got where we are and the proposal that I have before you. If you could pull up this slide, I grabbed this this slide that Ms. Wendell is going to put on the screen. This is from a previous presentation that you guys saw, and it just is a reflection of the inflationary pressure that we've experienced over the last 5 years and water and sewer rates. So this just shows to what degree our water and sewer rates have not kept up in the last 5 years. And it's not just the last 5 years. In 2023, the rate study recommended a 19% increase for water and a 39% increase for sewer. of course, those were unpalatable to the community, so we were not able to get those very large rate increases. So just like compounded interest has a beneficial effect, compounding, not paying for something, has this effect. And I think the other piece that's really critical when we look at whether or not to, or what amount to raise rates versus kind of the outside capital spend question is, you've already bought down rates by 3% by issuing a $10 million bond in October. That was about an average 3% buying down rates. But that still commits you to, into 2030, needing to fill that hole, because that hole is not being filled in rate increases. So like the capital spend that you spend, which is a part of the recommendation tonight, does set you up for kind of in perpetuity having to have those large capital spends for the utility or significant rate shock. And that's a policy decision that it's very valid to use non-ratepayer revenue. It happens across the country, happened in the community I came from, but it will make this conversation, when I hope to still be here in 2030, just that more difficult. I think that the consultant, Mr. Quinn, already went through kind of what has changed since November of 24 and why we've been able to drive down those numbers a little bit. Just want to mention that all this information is on the utility website, so there's a lot of really good history and a really good, like, how did we get here or there for the listening public. I want to talk a little bit about debt versus cash, only because I think I saw all of you get it, and I think all of you are probably smarter than me, but it actually took me a long time to understand why debt was so much cheaper, like why the debt scenarios were so much better. I was like, well, why don't we just do debt? That makes so much sense. Well, that's just because we're deferring it to out years. So under the debt scenario, the reason why it costs so much less in upfront spend is because we're just adding that to the utilities budget over the next 20 years. So I think Mr. Quinn was quick to point out that we have a tremendous amount of debt capacity in the utility. It's very common practice, but it's not free money. I was like, wow, the interest rate must be so great that it's just free money. That is not the case. So again, that use of debt is still deferring some of those expenditures. Also wanted to, because this was difficult, I'm just basically hashing through all the things that were difficult for me to understand. The difference between, when you guys think of debt, you think of bond debt. Bond debt, according to the utility, is just like cash because it's OPM, other people's money. They don't have to pay for it. So whereas you think of, the bond as debt, it absolutely is debt to the general fund. But from the utilities perspective and the pressure on the rates, it is just like cash. I want to mention a little bit how important our capital budget spend is in our community. I think sometimes Mr. Watt was always quick to point out, and sometimes we forget that we provide an important economic driver in our community by providing utility and street jobs. We have industries that are built around that, and we rely on those industries when we have any type of failures, water main breaks, et cetera. And so keeping like a steady industry and that civil work is also really good for our community. So that's why you do see this kind of like steady spend. The steady spend is also based on the capacity of our contractors and of our staff to kind of get those projects through the door. Just to touch briefly on potential other funding sources, of course, we've got the temporary 3%. We started to dabble in that, and this budget year and last budget year, spending some of the money we would normally spend on just the top layer of street infrastructure improvements and the utility infrastructure improvements underneath that. Of course, the temporary 1% has been talked about a lot as kind of something that wasn't included in this round of funding, could be included next year. Historically, we've relied on that. I think it was a cumulative $15 million of 1% funding in the last round. So, that's the cash infusion, right, that the utility needs to offset those rates. Let's see. If I'm following my memo, which takes a little bit of a rabbit hole or of a squirrel, I want to talk a little bit about bonds in general. So you had asked what a $10 million bond would do to utility rate increases, and that's how we got to this 5% number. We were like, okay, if you do $10 million in a bond, we could buy those rates down to 5%. You also are being asked tonight to talk about bonds in general. So kind of zoom out and think about not just utility bonds, but also school bonds. And so you'll see on page 2 of the memo and page 12 of your packet, just some really rough modeling of what a $15 million school bond on top of a $10 million utility bond on top of, in future years when we may need that capital, glacial lake outburst flooding match money, second crossing match money. All of that is just to give you some context for the utility bond conversation because it is tied to just bonds in general. And then to wrap up my summary of my memo, I worked with the utility and we really sharpened our pencils and scoured budgets to try to come to you with the recommendation that we feel like has the lowest impact on our ratepayers and the lowest, current year pain on our budget. And that scenario that I have presented to you is a 5% increase every year, and then using street sales tax funds, basically using sales tax funds to buy down the rate in future years. We don't need any capital infusion until 28. We don't have the 1% until 29, so we would have to rely on the street sales tax in 2028, and then we'd have to rely, of course, on the assembly at the time and the voters at the time approving incorporating the remaining $8 million to get us to 2030 into the 1% funding. We'd also have to rely on debt, about $7.3 million of debt amortized over 20 years. So that's kind of the formula that I gave you as a starting place to try to think about what we could do today that had the least impact. You don't have to make a decision on that capital infusion today because, of course, a different assembly will be making that decision unless you decide to put bonds on the October ballot. That being said, any direction that you can give the manager for future years will, of course, help me, in 27, 28, bring you, what you need to be able to at least have those conversations. So you'll see that I have my first recommendation is in regards to scenario 4, and my second recommendation is to discuss school bond, utility and school bonds. So it's a lot of moving parts, but happy to answer any questions.
Manager Kester, thank you for that explanation. Before I go to questions from the committee, I wanted to discuss just briefly, I was part of that assembly as one of our first things, and we didn't want to have the max utility rate that was recommended to us. That's what we got on that 2%. I remember when we actually discussed that moment because we felt like we were collecting just a little bit too much, and we did the first year was a higher number, and then it was 2 following those. And we did that because my recollection is we thought it lined up with what the expenses were going to be. So getting into this situation, it's just good proof that we have to make decisions not just based on those immediate needs. Like, it felt good to be able to hit a 2% on that second year, but it ended up being a little short-sighted because now we have a more significant wastewater problem that we might have been able to make up a little bit had we done that full recommended amount. And that was all sitting with me as we were getting this presentation, but it was definitely in 2018 or 2019, so I wanted to share it with the group. I have Ms. Atkinson and Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Kester, you mentioned with scenario 4, with 1% sales tax not being available to FY29, that we'd be looking at street sales tax for FY28 for sewer, which the presentation has like $1.4 million of need in that year. Can you give us a sense, if you have a sense, on what that 1.4 million coming out of street sales tax, what the impact will be?
Manager Kester.
Yeah, I really tried to tell you what street would get delayed, and then I was like, I can't do that because, of course, they all would just get shifted. But a street improvement is really anywhere to $3 to $4 million. So what it would do is we have in our 6-year CIP, 2 to 4 streets funded every year, and it would just take that last one and push it out another year.
Mayor Weldon, followed by Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 3% sales tax is due in 2026. We didn't do it this last year, or this last time, but the time before, I believe we gave something like, and we don't need the exact numbers, 16 million to water and 18 million to wastewater. what would that, so that's 30 million, what would that have on effect of this if we just rely totally on the 3%?
So, Director Flick might have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the 3%, when you say last time, the 3% has never included, the temporary 3% has never included utility infrastructure. The temporary 1% has included utility infrastructure, and in the last round, it was a combined total of $15 million.
Maybe I'm just confusing it, but I think the time before was more. So what if we relied on either the 3% or 1%? How does that change our picture?
So the 5% increase that I presented to you does rely on the 3% and the 1% to the tune of $10 million plus debt. If you wanted to rely on $20 million, I would definitely have to model that again with Mr. Quinn to see kind of how that impacted both our operating and our capital budget. But that is something we could do.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Manager Custer, I'm thinking about rate shock. And as you said, you know, well, I want to keep this concise, but you were, you know, you said you'll still be here in 2030. We all hope. So even if we're not here, but could you speak to, with this scenario, at that point, it will rely on that amount of money without it being like an even more significant like whiplash. So what your thoughts were there when you made this recommendation?
Let's see, I think the heart of your question is something that I can't answer, which is, well, what will the rate increases need to be in 2030 if we adopt your recommendation? And
but maybe I can clarify. That's not what I wouldn't expect you to know that. I know that. I am asking more why this is a good idea when we know that this will put us back in the same scenario in 5 years.
Manager Kester.
yeah, I mean, I think that it's a starting place, the scenario 4 recommendation that you've been given, and was a real attempt to try to find something palatable to the body. Whether or not it's a good idea, I mean, I agree with you, it defers costs. I mean, we're looking at potential, like, needing to replace our entire sewer treatment plant. Now I'm like, no, we're gonna figure that out. We're gonna like keep this baby running. But when we talk about those really large future expenditures, those are the type of projects that we're talking about. So I guess I can't give you a great reason why scenario 4 is a good idea. It just felt like, from my judgment, it was a starting place for kind of the least painful option to present to you.
Thank you, Ms. Kester. Good, Ms.
Thank
Hughes.
you. Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate that. I was just, you know, trying to consider all thoughts. Thanks.
Additional questions? I'm sorry, Mr. Steiniger, followed by Mr. Smith.
And you kind of touched on this a little bit in your answer to Ms. Hughes Candies, but I'm thinking about the kind of risk tolerance level. So the capital plan that we're talking about here is kind of most meager capital plan compared to, you know, what's recommended by the utility. And I'm assuming that behind that recommendation is a lot of condition assessment of some of our sewer assets, and there's some kind of risk weighting going on there. If we went with this plan where we're kind of consuming a lot of our ability to, you know, find money outside of rate increases through, you know, debt issuance or the 1% sales tax, if any of those assets that aren't on the meager capital plan fail in the next 2 to 3 years, you know, what are our other resources to go to at that time? Is it just, you know, loading up additional, you know, GeoBond debt, or, you know, a mid-term rate increase off to individuals, or kind of, you know, what are the other relief valves if, you know, this kind of highly risk tolerant plan proves to be too risky?
I think you've probably identified the memo that I would bring to you should we have a catastrophic failure that requires a significant and emergency capital investment. Debt, whether it be SRF, bond, certainly working with our delegation to make it a priority. A lot of congressionally directed spending. Senator Murkowski, for example, has been very involved throughout her career in water wastewater projects. So I think, we would, depending on what our time threshold is, we would be looking at, grants and, I mean, something catastrophic, right? Like the treatment plant, failed or something like that. I think that's where we would be looking. The condition assessment is very good for the next, till 2030. And then, further out, as Mr. Quinn noted, it's a lot harder to kind of pinpoint exactly what those expenditures and that expenditure vulnerability is. So I don't have a great answer for if, something catastrophic happens, then we're going to deal with it, I guess is my answer. And you identified all the tools that we have to deal with it from a funding perspective.
Good, Mr. Steinecker? Very good. Yeah. Our city emergency operations are well-versed in responding to emergencies. I'll just make a note of that, Madam Manager. I believe I have Mr. Smith, Deputy Mayor Smith. Mayor Walden?
Okay, so I'm warming up to scenario 4. But I am wondering, and maybe this was the crux of Ms. Hughes-Gandy's question, and it might not be, but is there a way that if we do debt plus the 5%, and whether that debt is loans, 3%, 1%, or bond, is there a way that we can get past this sticker shock just a little bit and do a little bit more in debt and lower the percentage rate, or will that just bring us right back to where we were started?
Manager Kester.
Yeah, so just want to clarify the confusion on the term debt. When we use debt in reference to the utility, it's taking on SRF loan debt. So could we borrow more from SRF to buy down the utility rate? I think we could. The number that you were presented today is what we call a strategic use of debt, and basically that's to control project costs, because using that funding source drives project costs. So we could use more SRF debt and incorporate those increased project costs into our projects, which would then amortize those expenditures over the 20-year period. The 3% sales tax is just like a cash infusion into the utility, and that is, an appropriation by the Assembly, whether it be a bond, a general obligation bond, or sales tax. And so I think, your question is, bring me back how much it would cost to buy down. And this is what I asked the consultants. I was like, bring me back a number on how much it would cost to buy down the rate increase to 5%. And that's how we got to the scenario 4. If you're like, bring me back a scenario on how much it would cost to buy down to X percent, then we can bring you back that information and give you what that would be in both SRF debt and a capital infusion to the utility.
All good. I think I have Ms.
Chair
Atkinson.
Bryson,
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Wendell.
Apologies for the interruption. I would just like to note for the record that Assemblymember Wall has left the meeting. She said that she would try to rejoin in maybe 30 minutes. She's having some connectivity issues.
Thank you, Ms. Wendell. All right, so we are at almost 7 o'clock. We have just a little housekeeping. We have Assembly grants and community requests scheduled for 7:30, and we still have seasonal sales tax to go. I've got a couple more folks with questions, and then if we could move into trying to see if we can give manager some direction. And I believe I have Ms. Atkinson is up.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. I just want to see if I can restate maybe what you're saying so that we understand cash versus debt, because I thought I understood it, and then people were talking, and I'm less sure I understand it. Scenario 4 would be the DEC revolving loan fund, and then looking at potentially cash infusions later on in like 28, 29, 30, those kind of, that's scenario 4. Whereas scenario 3, for instance, would be like we bond today, we start looking at street sales tax today, and don't do the revolving loan fund. Is that correct? No, that's not correct. Please tell me how I'm wrong.
Scenario 4 is you take $7.5 million out in SRF debt, which is utility debt that the utility and the ratepayers have to pay back. And you infuse the utility with a total of $10 million in cash. That $10 million could come from a $10 million bond that you authorize in October of 25. It could come from a $10 million bond you authorize in October of 26. It could come from any combination of street sales tax and 1% sales tax, as long as we have a minimum contribution to the utility in 28, because that's when they start to spend that down. So the other scenarios model like not using any SRF debt, but still getting that cash, which could be a bond to the utility, or not getting any cash from the assembly, basically. Does that help? Okay.
Ms. Candies, do you have a nice quick question for us before we get into the discussion?
I think so. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Custer, or Manager Custer, I was just curious, with the 5%, was that just based on the fact that it's the same for both of them? I was just wondering about that. Was that just based on, because you said, bring me back a number that gets me there, and that's why the number is different for how much cash infusion it needs, because the starting point was a percentage, is that right? There's not like a philosophy there.
You are correct. The direction that I gave Mr. Quinn was a 5% increase purely based on my of what might be palpable.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Just want to make sure.
All right. I'm going to go to Madam Mayor for a motion.
Okay, I'll try one. It's probably not what everybody wants, but including the city manager, but I'll try. So I would move to approve scenario 4, debt plus 5% rate increase, with direction on a plan for future capital funding assistance and possible rate decreases. But I don't think we are ready for our plan on that quite yet. But I just want to move so you have some place to start scenario 4 with a debt plus 5% rate increase.
All right, you've heard the motion, so we're going to go to discussion. Ms. Atkinson, followed by Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't mind the first part of your motion, but rate decreases in future years when we're talking about this fiscal cliff and this meager capital plan, I don't know if I'm ready to go there quite yet.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I appreciate Manager Custer getting us started and trying to bring back something that was a way forward in a sticky situation. And I appreciate Madam Mayor for taking a stab and getting us talking. I would object if that was the way we were going. It is not palpable to me, the other scenarios. I am very cognizant of just how much an increase that is for people. But I think, like you, Mr. Bryson said earlier in this meeting, I was also part of that assembly that did the lower utility rates. And I brought that up when we did our utility bond last year. At a certain point, things just cost what they cost, and it's super painful. But the further we keep pushing this out and artificially coming up with numbers that, you know, are easier for our residents to budget for, I fully understand why we do that. But I think 5% is too low based on what we're seeing here. So for myself, I'll just say if it's these 4 options, I would be interested in option or scenario 2. I don't know if this is, you know, we could do more modeling if someone said what if it was scenario 5 and we did this kind of infusion? I mean, there might be a way there are countless scenarios that we could look at, but for many reasons, mostly that it just does not pencil out, and I don't want us to be a body that kicks problems forward to future assemblies, and only continues to put us in a worse situation financially at a time where our equipment is super old. I mean, it already makes me nervous that we're doing the lower maintenance, but I trust staff if they think they're comfortable with that. So I have a lot of objections with this one, and I guess those are some of my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Huskindis. That brings us to Mr. Steiniger.
Let me go first.
Oh, sorry, Madam Mayor. Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
Okay, this just reminds me why I should never try and predict the assembly. I thought people were squishy on the rates, so I'm going to strike my possible rate decreases out of my motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hearing that new motion, Mr. Steiniger, go ahead.
Well, that gives me one less thing to talk about then. Thank you. I'll echo, though, Ms. Huskindis in my concern about 5% maybe being too low. And so when I heard that, prior assembly kind of bent down that curve of rate increase from, 8 and 6% a year to 2, I went and did some quick back of the napkin math to see what the rates would be today had that not happened, had the 8% and 6% happened every year. And combined, it would be a little over $200 this year. So even with that, looking at the new information from FCS from Mr. Quinn, you don't get to that rate until about 2029 on a pure rate increase funded level. So that was justified, that bending the curve, but I don't think we'd be justified in doing it a second time and doing 5% a year here, because then we're just continuing to push the rate that we're charging so far below the actual cost of operations that we become more and more reliant both on debt issuance, whether it's revenue bonds, which that's going to be in the rate for 15, 20 years, or geobond debt, which that's going to be in our mill rate for 15, 20 years. We're pushing the costs of today out into the future in a way that's just going to push that cliff further and further. And then 6 years, 10 years from now, we'll have another assessment that says, now you need to do 15% a year for 6 years or something along those lines in order to continue to cash fund. So, but at the same time, I don't think it's super palatable to do these 10% increases for 5 years. I understand the motivation behind trying to push them back. I might be more supportive of a larger rate adjustment in the first year that then is followed by 5% in out years, so that we kind of try to get to where we need to be on these rates instead of relying on the tools that I think are better kept for some of those bigger projects that we're deferring. If a pipe collapses underneath the street or something along those lines that drives costs in an unpredictable manner, I think we need to keep some of our powder dry and not use it simply to try and reduce the rate increase down to 5% a year. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Steiniger. Mr. Steiniger, the one piece of information that I wanted to give to you is that when we did the 2%, there was no additional debt assigned to it. So it was only 2% as part of it. And then I think I have Ms. Atkinson, Mr. Smith. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I'm taking a second bite at the apple here, but I want to make clear, 5% increase is already a pretty hefty increase yearly. And I know when we first looked at this like a year ago in Public Works and Facilities, there were some much higher increases. And that was frankly a shock and made me very hesitant. I'm really impressed with staff able to get it down to 5%. But I want us all to remember that these are, when we talk about affordability in Juneau, utilities rates are one of the biggest factors in affordability because it affects everyone, including some of our lowest income families, and it can really hit them hard. And so I think this is a good way to balance, with the 5% increase yearly, taking some big increases, but also, trying to keep it as low as we possibly can. And I'm very sympathetic to people who are concerned about, are the soundness of our water and wastewater in the future. But, as Ms. Kester said, this is something that a lot of communities do. I think we're being creative with use of debt and potential cash influxes as well. And though I would not be supportive of going down further from 5%, because I do think we have to fund our utilities, 5% is a big increase, and I do want to emphasize that, and this will impact our community. So I'm very supportive of the mayor's motion now that she has amended it to take out the decreases in future years.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. I miss you, Scandies.
Why not? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to throw into the conversation that for sure, 5% is a lot. For sure, Juneau is expensive. I have no doubt that lower increases than 5% are truly going to impact our lowest salary residents, or our residents who are living on a fixed fixed income. So I don't say any of that lightly. It's just, I guess what I would beg everyone to consider is that using SRF funds is a healthy use of debt. Doing bonds is a healthy use of debt. I don't think artificially putting our hand on the scale of the utilities rates is a particularly healthy practice. And a utility in general, which is why you see like there's some terrible ones, but in general, the philosophy is that with those, when you have a capital project and you do that debt, in general, the utility should mostly be paying for itself. And when we see we're going so far off kilter that our wastewater is going to be in an operational deficit without some adjustments, that to me is like a red flag. And I wish I had brushed up on the history besides just the bit of it that I was involved in. But I mean, it's super unfortunate that this, decades past have passed this problem up to residents now, but that makes me feel really passionate about not continuing to pass it forward, because it only gets worse and worse and worse. And certain things like inflation are just real. And I know city staff could say that you can't build anything for the price that, you can't repair anything for the price you used to. So that was my second bite of the apple. Thank you, Chair, for indulging me.
Thank you, Ms. Scandies. I have Deputy Mayor Smith and Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, sorry. I mean, we're obviously struggling with this because we're caught between two things: keeping rates for every homeowner in town is, anyway, trying to slow the growth of that because it's extremely impactful, and then also funding a critical piece of infrastructure. I will say I'm like cringing and being like, I wish I had voted for higher rates in 2020 and that I had put 1% sales tax for water and the utilities on when that happened years ago. But so I should have done that, and I'm feeling very bad about it now. I guess I guess I'm trying to remember. We don't necessarily have to finish this tonight, because I kind of agree with Mr. Steininger's possible like little bump, smaller thing. The manager wrote in her memo, the scenarios and things we can do are infinite and endless. And I guess just the one other thing I want to say is there are, the manager's proposed a way to pay for this plan using, $4 million of 1% sales tax in FY29 and 30. It could be higher than that. It could extend for the length of the 5-year term of the 1%, therefore making bigger investments into these utilities, which hopefully keeps the rates at a reasonable level, but at the same time investing in the utilities. So, because I hear people not wanting to saddle the utility with debt and, kick the can down the road, but I also have a really hard time looking at, in 5 years, utility rates going up by $60, $70 a month for everybody, every person in town, regardless of, it's a small condo, a mobile home, or a, huge house. So, I don't know if this is the perfect plan, is I guess what I'm saying. I think I like it more than the other ones, but I wonder if there's even a slightly better one out there. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And then I have Mayor Weldon and then Paul Kelly.
So I'm going to object to myself for purposes of a question. So going back to what Ms. Hughes Candy said, does the 5% bring our wastewater operating back up? So our revenue is higher, or are we still going to burn into the ground in FY 2030?
Madam Manager.
I'll remove my objection.
Thank you, Chair Bryson. Mr. Quinn may want to jump in here, but I believe that if the rate increases with scenario 5 hold true, that operationally the wastewater would be self-sufficient, and there would be some ability to take in capital. Obviously, more capital is required to keep up with the debt service. But as I understand the model, it would keep up with the operations.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I think I would be actually in favor of the mayor's motion just to get this get the ball moving on this. Like I think with scenario 4, we're basically introducing this at a future assembly meeting and then passing it so it could at another meeting a month later. So I think we have a little bit of time to work with this. I also do not want to kick the can down the road, and I think also perhaps the discussion we have on the next agenda item might also influence some of the wiggle room that we have to work with this. If we're not charging a 5% sales tax on this because we're collecting seasonal sales tax instead, that might actually give us a little more wiggle room to have our cake and eat it, to at least make something a little more palatable while also better funding the infrastructure. So I think I'd be in favor of moving forward with this and then possibly making some amendments as we go along.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. All right. Ms. Hall, did you want to put 2 cents in? All right. Everybody's had a bite at the apple. I want to just say 2 cents on it, and then maybe we'll call the vote. I think Ms. Atkinson said the best point, that this is cost of living. So water and wastewater, Deputy Mayor Smith got most of it right. It's every house, every trailer, every condo, but it's also every single business that every single one of us utilize in town. That's why I'm in favor of the 5% rate, because it has rippling effects. It's not just how it impacts your household, it'll be how it impacts every business that every one of us go in. Having the 5% gives a consistent, reasonable increase. And I like the SRF because to me, having the entity pay for it, it seems to be we'd have the right money going for the right product. Trying to blend it in for a bond or general fund, it's just not as simple and as clean. And then that could be what kicks the can down the road. If we have a dedicated percent to increase it and then we get the loans for it, all that's dedicated to that project. And it keeps it very specific for water and wastewater. That would be why I support the mayor's motion. Do we have an objection? I'm sorry, did we have someone else up here? I didn't see another.
Hughes Candy's, I believe, objected, so you have a motion with a.
We have a motion and an objection. Ms. Wendell, will you call the roll?
Thank you, Chair Bryson. On the motion to approve scenario 4, debt plus 5% rate increase, Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Assemblymember Hughes Scandies.
No.
Assemblymember Steininger.
No.
Assemblymember Hall.
Yes.
Assemblymember Atkinson.
Yes.
Assemblymember Kelly.
Yes.
Assemblymember Smith.
Yes.
Chair Bryson.
Yes.
Motion passes, 6 ayes, 2 nays.
Thank you for that decision. Did we want to try and tackle point 2 right now, or do we need to take a 5-minute break? We'll take 5 and then we'll come back and finish that discussion. Thank you. So that brings our assembly discussion to bonds. And so our question here is school bonds or utility bonds or both. And if you know what the magic number is, yes, Ms. Atkinson, you're going to get to go first. If you know which number if you have a preference for the number, you can go ahead and include it. We wanted to poll everybody, and then we will go into a brief bond discussion for that outcome. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think my comments will be surprising to anyone in the body, but I'm sympathetic to, obviously, our schools have a lot of deferred maintenance, and it would be good to get school bonds on the ballot this year, but I think there's probably only capacity on this assembly to do one bond package, and considering what we talked about tonight, I think it would be prudent to look at utilities bonds. 10 million is a minimum, but if based on what we just voted on with scenario 4, but if we were to look at a 15 or 20 million dollar bond, we could maybe allay some of the concerns that were talked about with not funding our utilities well enough and potentially help with some of that fiscal cliff in 2030. So $10 million is a minimum for me, and I would like to see us move forward with utility bonds.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. I'm going to go to Ms. Uscandies, who I believe is on the East Coast. Ms. Uscandies, are you still with us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, if it's okay with you, I'll just give my 2 cents, and then unfortunately I have to hop off because I have another day work here. But I was just going to say that certainly if you're not increasing utility rates, then you got to be spending on that utility somehow. So I am supportive of utility bonds. Not dead set on a number, but obviously the lower you make the rate, the more money you need. And then the only thought that I wanted to share in addition to that is because generally to some extent our capacity on, bonds is like, go forth and make us some pretty bonds, and the staff does all the work, although I know it's highly technical. I might be interested to get that introduced as a recommendation is, but I don't know at what point closer to the deadline that we'll know, if anything changes between now and the deadline for getting it passed, what the ballot will look like. I don't know if it would be interesting to pass it and then not issue it, but that's a little bit more of a different question. I don't know. I'm open to the idea of, I don't know if it's this year or not. I guess that would be my other 2 cents, is that I'm not sure this is a year. It depends on what else is on the ballot. And that is contingent on other things we're going to be talking about. So I will leave you there.
Thank you, Ms. Uscandies. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It has quieted down substantially out here, so nice to see you all again. Sorry for my absence. I just quickly on Ms. Uscandies, some of her points, looking at the timing, I think that we should be able to hold, make a decision about which bonds we're interested in and hold that decision until we have a little bit more information about what is going to be on the ballot. So I would like us to have something waiting in the wings for that day that we, know what is going to be on the ballot. So for me, I am similar to Ms. Uscandies, deeply interested in what else is on the ballot before I make a final decision. I missed the whole conversation earlier, but I don't think utilities is a great thing to put on the ballot this year for lots of political reasons. So I would support a school bond measure depending on what else is on the ballot, but I may be in the minority. And no, I don't think we should ever be putting a ballot less than $10 million on the ballot. So definitely thinking in that range.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wall. I'm going to go to Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I think we could get into a scenario of kicking another can down the road if we delay too much with school bonds as well. I especially since some of their requested improvements are roof improvements. So I would be interested in making some kind of movement on that, even if it's only $5 million, and we put another we put the rest of our bonds towards utilities, or we can see how that ends up working out. But I would like to see at least some of our bonds go towards schools this year.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. That takes us to Mr. Steininger.
So I think I'll echo what Ms. Wool said. I'm interested in continuing down the road of looking at a school bond package but don't necessarily know if it's something that we want to put on the ballot. I think there's a lot of factors that we don't necessarily know today that hopefully will become clear before we hit the deadline of when we have to put it forward. I could maybe be supportive of a utility bond, but I think I'd be more supportive of seeing an initial year higher on those utility rates and push the bond out a year or two so that we put, a little bit of time from the last major utility bond that we had on the last ballot. But, I think there's more information needed before I really have, a final decision in mind. So I think continuing down the road of preparing the bond packages is the best course of action.
I'm sorry, Mr. Steininger, can you say that last sentence again?
I think that continuing down the road of preparing the bond packages so that we have that available to us, should that be the direction that we want to go when we get to the deadline.
So that was both school and utility?
Both school and utility, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Hall?
I think there's going to be an awful lot on the ballot this fall, and so I am a little hesitant to charge forward, looking at this forecast and the big unknown being the glacier outflow and flood, basically, what we may need to do down the road with that. But I would say yes, go ahead and prepare. The school, I would say, would probably be a priority.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Deputy Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess to answer the question, I'd be open to a bond ordinance that would potentially put forward both. I don't have the magic number. I don't know if it absolutely has to be 10 or could it be 7.5 and 7.5. We know our schools need investment. We also obviously have just seen that our, utility needs investment. So I think that's probably where I would be going. And I'm still going to kind of keep thinking about, I'm not sold that, that the voters wouldn't be able to discern out between the different questions on the ballot. I mean, I feel like these things will get a lot of airtime. People, there might be a long list and people might be like, roll their eyes and be like, 6 ballot measures. But I do have, pretty good faith in people when they actually turn up to vote, haven't, figured it out and stuff. So I understand the concern, but I'm kind of leaning into, we know we need this investment. We know we're going to have some large possible projects coming into the future. And I worry, if we don't do it now, does it just start to stack the debt up when we're looking at a north crossing or, flood mitigation at the Mendenhall Lake? So, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Smith. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not really in favor of putting a bond on this ballot, but I can see the wisdom of the ladies on Zoom. So I guess we could prepare one, but as Ms. Gladaszewski would have said, doesn't mean I'm going to vote for it when it comes before us again. So I think, but it would be wise, I would guess, to see what's going to happen with these ballot initiatives and see if they get their signatures, and might as well have something in your pocket, I guess, but at this time, I don't think I would vote for either one of them.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. And as I was just tallying up, some of you said both bonds, some of you said one. I have 5 tallies on school and 5 tallies on utility. So thank you for making it easy for everybody. I'm going to have to side with the mayor on this. I do not think this is the right year for a bond package. We go through a tremendous amount of effort. Staff has to do a tremendous amount of effort. I don't know that the community would support a bond. I would rather us get the utility rates squared away. If we're going to have a first sticker shock year of bumping utility rates, I'd rather that be the only thing that the citizens, residents of Juneau are thinking about. If we do that while issuing another bond, I think I would go with Mayor Weldon. I would support $10 million for utility because that could be directly used to lower utility rates for every house and business in the community. But again, same thing the mayor said, I don't know that I would vote for a bond, but I would fall through the size of the utility if I was going to do one. That's my 2 cents on it. Deputy Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually just had a question for staff. Do we have any sense of, the capacity or, I guess just kind of the demand on local contractors in, for construction or things? I've heard that the state maybe did some bungling with like their state transportation improvement plan and with like some federal uncertainty. I mean, are we any way that we're hearing or seeing that our, local contractors maybe, not having the work that keeps them and their crews busy?
Manager Kester.
I mean, I can't say definitive. I just know that in talking with engineering, there is that concern with our civil contractors.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. Would one of you remind me on a bond package, can you say up to, or does it have to be a set amount?
Director Flick.
Thank you, Chair Bryson. Mayor Weldon, I'm not sure. I'd have to confer with with the law department. We'd be happy to explore that.
Manager Kester, we had some appeal to have a bond package, but it was split kind of evenly between school and utility. Do you have enough information, or do you just need us to take a vote now?
Thank you, Chair Bryson. I think what I whispered to the finance directors, they're all over the map. So, but what I heard is that you want to keep having this conversation. I didn't hear that you needed more information from staff to have that conversation. So it's certainly easy enough for us to keep facilitating, putting that before you.
Thank you, Manager Kester. Ms. Wool.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I don't know what I feel like people are kind of spread out, and I don't know that necessarily means we want to keep having that conversation. I wouldn't mind, I would like us to get down to one. We don't have to vote for it. If we can't do that tonight, then fine. But I couldn't count the votes to figure out whether that's possible or not. But it sounds like it might be possible to get us down to one. So, I mean, I could make a motion and we could see what happens. I could be wrong that people don't want to make a decision tonight, but I really feel like limiting ourselves to one might be helpful.
Ms. Wool, would you like to present a motion?
Sure. I'll make a motion that we ask staff to prepare an ordinance that would put a up to $10 million or I'll say up to $15 million bond on the ballot for school bond projects, and only that, only one ball and not utilities. And I'll ask your unanimous consent.
We've heard the motion. We have objections. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I've said, I'm a little hesitant if we are going to go with one, to go with school bonds. I'm not opposed to continuing the conversation on school bonds, but I am not ready to remove the possibility of utility bonds on this ballot.
Mayor Weldon.
I'd object for two reasons. Number one, I think that's too high. And number two, my question, I guess, to staff would be, if we did a utility bond, what would be the projects of that utility bond move forward, and what would the amount recommended?
Madam Mayor, Madam Manager, did you know that list?
Yes, you want a list of the specific utility maintenance projects that we would do with the $10 million, correct?
Mayor Weldon, is that the question?
My question is, I'm disagreeing to limit us tonight also, but, so my question, you said, what questions could we ask of staff? My question would be, if we looked at a utility bond, what would be the projects under that utility bond, and what would be your recommended dollar amount for that bond?
Manager Kester.
Yeah, I'm happy to bring back that information.
Thank you, Manager Kester. So, Deputy Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move an amendment to that motion, and that would be to reduce it to up to $10 million for, up to a $10 million bond for schools.
You've heard the amendment. Are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, we have a $10 million figure on a school bond. That is the new motion, $10 million for a school bond. Are there any objections to that? We have two objections. Does anyone need to speak their objection, or can we call the roll? Call the roll, please, on the motion for $10 million bond package for school district.
Thank you, Chair Bryson. Assemblymember Wall.
Yes.
Assemblymember Atkinson.
No.
Assemblymember Smith.
Yes.
Assemblymember Kelly.
Yes.
Assemblymember Hall.
Yes.
Mayor Weldon. Assemblymember Steininger.
Yes.
Chair Bryson.
No.
Motion passes, 5 ayes, 3 nays.
Deputy Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move the drafting of a utility bond, wastewater and water utility bond for up to $10 million.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. You've heard the objection, or you've heard the motion. Are there any objections? Ms. Wall.
No need to speak. Thank you.
Mayor Weldon.
I appreciate Mr. Smith's looking to keep the utilities in there, but I guess, never mind, I'll remove my objection. And if he said up to 10, never mind, I'll remove my objection.
So we have a motion for $10 million, up to $10 million for utility bond. We have an objection. Ms. Wendell, will you call the roll?
Thank you, Chair Bryson. Assemblymember Smith.
Yes.
Assemblymember Wall.
No.
Assemblymember Steininger.
No.
Assemblymember Hall.
Yes.
Assemblymember Atkinson.
Yes.
Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Assemblymember Kelly.
No.
Chair Bryson.
No.
Motion fails, 4 ayes, 4 nays.
So that brings us to agenda topic number 3, seasonal sales tax. I had this.
Mr. Bryson?
Yes, Ms. Lake.
I might suggest that we move to agenda item number 4, since we're close to we're after, but still close to the 7:30, and come back to seasonal sales tax.
That's actually a pretty good idea. I have a feeling we're going to be chatting about seasonal sales tax for a little bit. So are there any objections to going to assembly grants and community requests? Seeing none, we'll move to agenda item 4. And is this you, Director Flick?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bryson. As a reminder, and just to set the stage, some of you all have sponsored requests from community for grants. You presented those last time we met, April 16th. Questions were provided by you of things that you needed to know in order to make a funding decision. Those answers have been provided to you in the packet for today's meeting. And at this point, we really just need to make sure that all of your questions have been answered so that you can make a decision on a funding choice. Those decisions aren't being made tonight. We just need to, because they fall under kind of your pending list decisions. So those decisions about funding are not being made tonight, but we wanted to make sure that if you had any additional questions that needed to be answered, that those can be presented tonight so we can make sure that those are answered for you.
Thank you, Director Flick. And I'd like to thank all members of the audience that are part of those community grant request organizations. Thank you for participating with us. I think that just takes us directly to, were there any additional questions or requests for information on any of these community grant requests? This was the last touch for the assembly. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. I have a question for Juneau Community Foundation if they are in the audience tonight.
Do we have a member of Juneau Community Foundation?
Chair Bryson.
Ms.
We
Wendell.
have Ms. Skilbred online.
Ms. Wall, we have Ms. Skilbred online. Go ahead and ask your question.
All right. Thank you. This is maybe a question Ms. Skilbred wasn't expecting. So if you're not ready to answer this, Ms. Skilbred, that's okay. But I feel like I wanted to ask this on the record. We have an applicant in our pool of community grantors, the Southeast Food Bank, that I think originally applied through JCF. And my understanding was JCF was, hasn't made any funding decisions, but was thinking about funding, partial of that, but not the whole thing. They pulled their application, came through the assembly process. My question for you is, if the assembly was to deny that request, what would JCF do in that situation? Would it be too late for them to seek partial funding through JCF, or is that a bit hard for you to tell right now?
Ms. Skilbred.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, loud and clear.
Okay. We would be able to review the grant application that we have from Southeast Food Bank. It's already been through the process with us, with our professional advisory committee, 2 rounds with them, and discussed by our grants committee. So we could definitely keep them in the pool.
Thank you, Ms. Skilbred. Ms. Wool, did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you, Ms. Skilbred, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Deputy Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also had a question for Ms. Skilbred, and that's if you receive this amount or a portion less, percentage less, or whatever, how do you determine where that's going to go? I mean, do you kind of spread it out equally, or anyway? Could you help me with that part?
Ms. Skilbred.
Sure. Thank you. We've reviewed all of the grant applications in front of us, and we've reviewed the additional requests that came to us when it was understood that those organizations who had funding from us in previous years would be coming through us for any additional funds. And so we've pretty much figured out where funds would go. And we would be allocating those funds based on the entire process that we began in December. And that includes, several, I think 6 listen and learns, where we have members of the nonprofits that have requested funds come and talk with each other and us, and be able to understand what the priorities are for those organizations' clients as a group. So they basically, the organizations themselves say, here's where the gaps are. So.
Thank you, Ms. Skilbrand. Additional questions from the committee? I believe that we have the pending list scheduled for action on the May 14th. Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor.
Sorry, I just wasn't fast enough. I have a couple questions, actually. First one is
Madam
for
Mayor. Go ahead.
Southeast Food Bank. Reading your, some of the answers to your question, you said there's an increasing need over Southeast. Are the other communities increasing their funding to you?
So if members from the Southeast Food Bank would join us at the public testimony stand.
Please state your name.
All right, hello, can you hear me? All right, Jeremiah Beagle with the
thanks for
Southeast
joining
Alaska
us.
Food Bank. I am the board chair. And the question you had was, were other communities increasing funding?
Correct,
We
because you
received-
said there was an increasing need over Southeast, and I'm wondering if the other communities are increasing their funding to you.
So there is a significant increase in need that we're seeing through all the nonprofits that we serve, and then through folks that have never experienced food security in the past as well. So we're getting a lot of new folks that have been pretty solidly in the middle class, slipping down and not quite being able to make ends meet. And we're trying to navigate that at the same time that we navigate the increased needs of all our member agencies, and really trying not to pull back in any way. We're noticing that we're kind of at a pivotal time where we can step up to the plate and anticipate that this is probably not going to get any better before it gets worse, and try to get a little bit ahead of it. Having the new position will allow us to do that. We've never actually received funding. We've never requested funding from the city and or any other entity for what we do. We'd based everything that we'd done off of grocery rescue in the past, and that had been enough. Grocery rescue was enough, and then we'd supplemented with a few pallet purchases, so we'd never actually received funding from outside sources around Southeast Alaska. The majority of what it is that we distribute, I'd say probably 90%, if not a little more, is throughout Juneau, Douglas, and then we have another 10%, much smaller amount, probably anywhere from 5 to 10% that goes throughout Southeast Alaska at this particular point in time. We're trying to strengthen that as we're noting that communities outside of Juneau are also, their populations are on the decline, and they're having a little more stress placed on them than we are here when we see a lot of that inflation taking place. So overall, we've never made a request before. So no, we that small amount that we distribute to those other communities that we're trying to be a little more impactful and powerful with, we're trying to tap into some federal funding that would allow us to bring those resources throughout Southeast Alaska. This other position would I hope, the dream would be that with this initial funding, we would then be able to get enough funding and have enough time to apply for new grants and things along those lines that would then allow us to fund it with what it is that we're able to bring in every year. So grant writing would be a big part of it. Resources, the actual food resources, without having to purchase them ourselves. We'd gone from anywhere from 6 to 12 to 60 plus pallets purchased every year to try to make sure we're meeting the need of the nonprofits that rely on us. And so no, we haven't ever made an ask before to anyone. This is a new zone for us, and we were a little nervous when we made the request with the Juneau Community Foundation that our needs couldn't quite be met with all of their extenuating circumstances and everyone that already relies on them needing more to simply do what they'd done in the past. So it was a difficult situation, I think, that most nonprofits find themselves in now. And right now, we would love to step up to the plate and swing a little harder and try to make sure that we're getting ahead of the ball a little bit and acting on what was found in those lessons and learns. So it was fantastic that Amy Skilbred had put together those listen and learns, and we're really going to try to make sure that we bring what was brought to attention to reality. And we're in the process of putting those together. However, without the proper staffing, we won't be able to successfully follow through with it and make it all what it should be.
Thank you, Mr. Beadle. Mayor Weldon, do you have a follow-up question or another one?
Not for Mr. Beadle, thank you for that. My next question is for Trail Mix, and is there anybody from Trail Mix here? And my question is.
We do have a trail mix, we have a trail mix person. Mayor Weldon, this is, I'm a little remiss here. I've recused myself from voting because my daughter works for Trail Mix. But since this was just discussion, I didn't think that I had to recuse myself from the discussion here, or the questions.
I'm not the attorney in the room.
I won't ask any questions, but Madam Mayor, do you have any
You're not
questions?
voting on anything, so. So my question to you, since this is for Eagle Crest kind of summer operations, is there any plan to recoup some of that money with some kind of pass? I.e., if you take your bike up there, you have to have a pass, sort of like the Nordic Trail up at Eagle Crest. You have to carry a pass and pay some money up front.
Yeah, that would be a question that I'm going to leave up to Craig at Eagle Crest. We would just be involved in the building of the trail, so I will leave financial aspects of managing that up to the Eagle Crest managers.
Any additional questions for Trail Mix? Thank you for coming down to join us.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question for the AYC apprenticeship program.
AYC apprenticeship program, do we have the representative here?
Chair Bryson, we have Ms. Scheibler online.
Excellent. Can you pull Ms. Scheibler over so she can answer? Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Scheibler, I was just, anyway, I guess my question is, with this apprenticeship program, is there, if someone successfully goes through it, is there anything that, I'm going to say ties, but, requires them to work in Juneau for a set number of years, or if they don't, they have to pay these funds back or anything? I'm just curious if there's any strong link to keep them in Juneau.
Ms. Scheibler.
Thank you for that question. No, we don't require them to pay anything back because they have earned the wages for working during their 2 years as an apprentice. What we have seen with those who are going to be graduating this May is that they are all deeply committed to their field and want to stay in Juneau. I think one of the ties that keeps them in is that they now become the journey workers to mentor new apprentices. So they're the mentors on site, and we kind of like foster that relationship and get them really excited to mentor people who were in their position just 2 years before.
Very good. Thank you.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. So this question is for United Way.
Representative United Way. In here?
No, don't let him talk.
We do have a rule that we have to laugh at least once a finance meeting. Mr. Jones is going to provide that comic relief for us. Mr. Jones, thank you for joining us this evening, sir. It's good to see you.
Well, this is pretty pertinent to you because my question for United Way is during the glacier outburst flood, Red Cross seemed to do a fine job and Salvation Army seemed to do a fine job. So I'm not sure why United Way is looking to get paid to do what you guys basically did for free.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I actually rehearsed the answer to the question very similar to that. I don't know if I want to actually say it. Most of my good answers are fantasy anyway. If if we do a job, even if it's not as good as it could be, and nobody pays us for it, then nobody wants to donate because we do it free. We can't do it free forever. None of these nonprofits in this room can do it for free forever. And we're at the point where our volunteers, myself included, are stretched as far as we can go. And donations are down. We don't have staff. And at some point, we just won't provide it. And those people that are harmed, those people that are in difficulty because of a disaster, will just not be able to get the services that we could provide. That's the cleanest answer I can give you without getting too verbose.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mayor, one follow-up question?
Follow-up. So appreciate the answer. I get it. But why would United Way be the person that received it instead of Red Cross or Salvation Army?
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The United Ways around the world and the U.S. and in Alaska specifically have traditionally not provided direct services. We have been one to collaborate, one to bring other people together, one who has been able to convene various parties together. And the goal of our project is to bring the nonprofit, the faith community, people that can respond to disasters together. We know that none of us singly can respond appropriately. But if we don't have a coordinated effort, so we know who to call, have a resource base that this church can do this nonprofit can do this nonprofit can do that, and then we realize in a disaster that we need X, we can go to that resource base and say, this nonprofit has agreed to provide X, we can go there. So the role of the United Way would be to be the coordinator, to be what we traditionally do at United Way, so that we continually maintain that resource base, that we continually keep track of who can provide what, and then we can try to match the need to the services that we know the nonprofits can provide. If we just simply allow it to continue, then we'll have 5 nonprofits and a bunch of citizens who are meaningful and want to help will all come together and try to find their direction independently. And it just will not be as efficient, nor as clean, nor as helpful to those who are harmed. None of us are in this business for ourselves. We're in this business and working for disaster relief because we know in a disaster, people have had the worst day of their life. And they've got to have somebody who can respond appropriately, cleanly, clearly, and with purpose. And that's what we're trying to do. We just can't do it with volunteer base. You can use volunteers in the middle of a disaster, but planning it, keeping your act together, doing the research that you have to do, the blue sky work cannot be done with volunteers because we just don't have that base. But when a disaster hits, we always have extra people come and help. We need to find a way to train them and get them to work as quick as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Are there additional questions for the United Way? Ms. Hall.
I guess I noticed in your letter the different organizations that you're hoping to bring together, and I don't see Tlingit and Haida and the tremendous effort they put forth in this most recent one. And are they part of this coordinating effort?
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Member Hall. Through the mayor, yes. They weren't specifically mentioned because at this point, Tlingit Haida in particular is working very much closely with the city on a government-to-government relationship with the All Hazards Plan, looking ahead to the future for the summer. But there are other parts of Tlingit Haida that we are working with. We put in what we could in terms of the number. We have recently sent out the invitations. We're not just waiting on this particular grant. We have our first sort of organizational meeting on the 22nd of May. We've sent out the invitations to the faith community, Tlingit Haida and others. We've asked them to pass on. We are wanting to respond the best we can. And so I'm hoping that the list that we put in our response is not exclusive. We're hoping that the number that's in there is doubled or tripled, and we can maintain that interest throughout the blue sky so that we are able to respond when a disaster hits. But no, the list we gave you is not exclusive nor excluding anybody.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Additional questions from you for the United Way? Seeing none, Mr. Jones, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Committee, additional questions for the organizations? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close this agenda topic. And again, I want to thank every organization that came. It is important that you came and go through the process with us. And it looks like that we have May 14th is when we have our pending list scheduled for action. Is that still correct, Director Flick?
Chairperson, yes, that is the plan, knowing that the calendar is very fluid, depending on how much discussion and time the body needs to make decisions. But right now, that is the plan.
Thank you, Director Flick. So maybe May 14th. All right. Do we need another break, or do we want to jump right into seasonal sales tax? Seasonal sales tax it is. Manager Kester. 5. All right. the Assembly Finance Committee back to order. Thank you. We're going to call the meeting back to order, please. We're going to go back to agenda topic number 3, seasonal sales tax. Director Fleck.
Thank you, Chair Bryson. There is a memo in your packet. It's on packet page 36 is where it starts. I'm going to talk through a few things here, and just want to acknowledge that we had a really good discussion back on April 16th. There are some questions that we're still working to answer that you provided. We're still working to provide answers to some of the questions that you had. And this memo tries to address some of the things that came up, but also provide you with some additional information. So what I do want to say is that any changes that are made to sales tax, as far as like going to a seasonal sales tax, would not impact your budget until FY27. So we are having this discussion because of the timing to get something on the ballot. And so this discussion can run in parallel with your budget conversations. So I just wanted to make sure that you had that clearly. Assemblymember Hugh Scandies asked a great question when we met last time, and that was basically, what's the purpose of the seasonal sales tax? And so are we seeking to simply recover lost revenue from exemptions, or are we seeking to increase the overall sales tax revenue base? And so as you have discussion tonight, I think that understanding the purpose of it as a body becomes very important. And so I wrote a little bit about that. I left you again with some important dates in the memo, recognizing that anything you want on the October 2025 ballot using the current calendar today needs to be introduced to the Assembly on June 9th for public hearing and action on July 28th in order to meet the printing deadline for the election. And again, I'm going to say this like as many times as I possibly can. I've put together numbers here that are based on giving you something to talk about. So the Assembly's not taking action. These numbers aren't like at your direction. They are simply here so that you can have meaningful conversation and see the impacts. What I will say, the tables that are in this memo, I did cull back the options based on the comments that were provided at our last Assembly meeting, where it seemed like in general the body was a little warmer to a small change between a summer and a winter rate as opposed to a very drastic rate change. So that was just my best read of kind of the conversation. So what you'll see, I'm going to talk through the 3 tables that are on the second page or packet page 37. The first table is essentially what you saw on April 16th. The difference being that we just pulled out the big swings. So it's got fewer options, if you will. This table is based on achieving is based on 5% sales tax. Remember that today that is 1% permanent, 3% temporary, 1% temporary. And the 3% and the 1% are voted on in different years. And so it's based on that entire 5%. And it also assumes that we want to collect the same amount of revenue and sales tax as we have previously. So for 5% in calendar year 24, we were talking about $65 million overall. So those are the assumptions that went into table 1. And so as you can see, status quo is just 5%, 5%. Our summer sales tax, or our visitor paid component of the sales tax, is about 18.4 million. Again, based on an imperfect extrapolation of what do we see in the winter months, and if people are basically purchasing about the same, the bump in the summer months is attributable to visitors. Not perfect, but that was the modeling that was used. So, like I said, table 1 is exactly what you saw last week. It's got a status quo. There's just a seasonal adjustment. There's the next column over is a seasonal adjustment where we're exempting food and making up that revenue through the sales tax. And then the last column in that table is exempting food and utilities and making up that revenue difference. So all the way through, we're still getting to about $65 million of revenue across all of those scenarios, with the last 2 columns exempting food and then food and utilities. So as I was working through how you would make decisions on this, and I think Mr. Smith provided some thoughts at our last meeting. Table 2 is essentially the same philosophy as table 1, except it pulls out the 1% temporary tax. So instead of trying to get to 65 million, we're trying to get to 52 million. And that's somewhat based on the idea that the 3% temporary tax, we use a lot of that for our day-to-day operational. And so we would want to ensure that whatever we do seasonally would care for the operational ongoing needs of the city. So that's why it's based on 52 million annually. It's only 4% because it's focusing on the 1% permanent and the 3% temporary, kind of pulling those together as a unit, if you will. Again, the same scenarios, just status quo. So we're looking at 4% of the 5, so status quo is the 4%. Still trying to get to the 52 million. With a seasonal sales tax, you can see that the winter drops down to 3%, whereas the summer would be 4.6. If you exempt food and again still stay at 52 million of that sales tax revenue, summer would be 5%, winter would be 3.25%, and if you exempted food and utilities, you'd end up with 5.5 in the summer and 3.5 in the winter. Again, numbers that I just played around and picked to get back to 52 million. We could adjust those numbers however the body feels. I will say in this scenario, the 1% temporary tax still exists. So if we wanted to say how much is sales tax, it's 1% plus whatever is in this. So if we look at the very last column, 5.5% and 3.5% gets us to the equivalent of 4. But because of the 1% temporary sales tax, we actually would, merchants would be collecting 6.5% in the summer and 4.5% in the winter because the 1% temporary sales tax is still out there. Does that make sense? It's a little fuzzy, but okay. So then table 3 addresses the question of, so table 2 says we just want to be able to collect enough revenue to take care of exemptions that might be out there, or exemptions that you might choose to enact. Table 3 says we also want to increase our overall revenue. And so in table 3, if you look at the status quo, you'll see it's 4% and 4%. So again, it's taking that 1% temporary tax out of the equation. It's bringing in $52 million. So there's 0 revenue increase. In this scenario, almost 15 million is paid in the summer by visitors. If we go, so we're not exempting anything in status quo, you're not increasing revenue, right? So if we go to the next column and say we want a seasonal sales tax with the intent of increasing revenue, well, if you left the winter sales tax at 4 and then just increased the summer by 1%, you would end up with $58.3 million in revenue as opposed to 52. So you increase your revenue by $6.2 million. $6.2 million, if you drop down to the last row, is equivalent to about 1 mil. So if the intent was we wanted to increase the sales tax so we could reduce the mill rate, you're looking at approximately 1.0 mils is what that would be. If the intention is we need to increase our revenue base overall, then that change would just bring in an additional $6 million. So there's a couple ways that you can look at the data in this table. And so again, you've got the visitor paid sales tax and the tax shift. The next column over, the 5.5 and the 3.75, again, brings in an additional $6.4 million, but it assumes there's an exemption on food. The last column, where it's 6% in the summer, 4% in the winter, assumes that you're exempting food and utilities and wanting to generate additional revenue, and that brings in about $6.3 million. Same thing applies with the temporary 1%. So again, if we go to the last column, where it's 6% and 4%, merchants would actually be collecting 7% and 5% because of the voter approved 1% temporary sales tax. So just, I don't know if that muddies the water or makes it easier. The intent tonight is to provide you additional information, give you an opportunity to have discussion. We will keep working on this, and I think in working with Assemblymember Wall on like how we want to use these Wednesdays nights that we have in the budget cycle. Do we want to continue walking down the sales tax path? Are we ready to make decisions? Does it need to sit a little bit longer? Do you have more questions? So this is really kind of an informational and a discussion item, and where it leads is up to the body.
Director Flick. Okay, so my notes that I had here is that one of the first questions that we would need to tackle, are we trying to exempt sales tax on food and utilities, which would give us a direction that we'd have to go? Or are we trying to accomplish an increase in revenue so that we could drop the mill rate? Or an increase in revenue? That's kind of the first thing that we're trying to figure out as we're talking about altering sales tax. What objective are we trying to do? I have Ms. Atkinson followed by Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the most important of those two things, I'm not opposed to either one of them, but exempting food and utilities to me, I think, is the more important purpose. I'm certainly open to both, but I would be I'd be a little hesitant to move this forward if we weren't exempting those two things.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I wasn't quite ready for comments yet. Actually, I was hoping to ask a follow-up question from Ms. Flick.
Go ahead, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. So I do feel the water is a little bit muddy. I'm not quite understanding when you're saying like we're at 6 and 4, but we still have the 1% sales tax, so the vendors are actually collecting 7. I'm not quite understanding, like, wouldn't we be able to repeal the temporary sales tax and we'd be able to just collect 6, just collect 4, and we would get the revenue that you're projecting there?
Director Flick.
Thank you, Chair Bryson. Assemblymember Kelly, in table 3, we're looking at the equivalent of today's sales tax at 4%. Rather than at 5%. So absolutely, I'm sure there's a way we could work with law to repeal taxes that are out there. The intent, what has been the intent of the 1% temporary tax, as I've learned, I've not been here when we've taken it to the voters, but is to identify a handful of projects that need specific funding and present those to the voters and ask for funding to work through those specific projects and or allocating some of those funds directly to, say, the utilities, as we talked about earlier. And so if there's an intention to continue that practice of having a 1% temporary tax that's brought to the voters with a series of projects or purposes, then table 2 and table 3 kind of address the underlying, more operating type focus of the sales tax. Does that help clear that up at all?
A little bit. I think I might need to follow up with you online, but that does help it clear a little bit. Thank you.
Yep.
And then I go to Mr. Steiniger.
First, just on kind of the follow up on Mr. Kelly's question, I do kind of think actually, look, just sticking to showing the total amount of sales tax, not portioning it out, might be easier for the public. That makes sense, but we also have access to you to ask more probing questions. And I think that first table where it just shows under what we're talking about, here's what an individual might pay, would be a little bit cleaner, I guess. But to the question that Mr. Bryson asked, I definitely am leaning more towards the idea of having a seasonal sales tax in order to afford exemptions to food and utilities, because I see the kind of philosophical benefit of the seasonal sales tax is, we're getting a little more revenue from summer visitors, and that provides very direct, very tangible relief to individual Juneawites, when they go to the grocery store and when they pay their utility bills. And so, I'd really lean towards that and not necessarily using it as a way to offset, pressure on the mill rate, which, while it's still a benefit to Juneawites, would be much less tangible for just individuals in town.
Thank you, Mr. Steininger. Mayor Weldon.
I appreciate what Mr. Steininger said, but I think the survey was, I think we decided this morning at 2022. We have looked at removing sales tax on food many times in the assembly. And the last time we did it, we couldn't get very far. And then we did a survey of the public, and almost 60% said they didn't care about having it removed. So it'll be interesting to see how this ballot initiative, so we might be doing something. And the response of a lot of them was, we can afford to pay that, so we don't care. And it is a regressive tax, but you have to remember the lowest of the low income, the WIC and the SNAP aren't paying sales tax on their food anyway, or at least what qualifies for WIC and SNAP. So I don't know if that's necessarily has to be there, but again, we have a ballot initiative that might be looking at that. So as Ms. Wall said in the last one, we should probably keep that in our arsenal, but there's plenty of people in this town that say we can afford to pay that and we want to help. So.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. Christine, Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. I think I just want to say right now that, to Ms. Flick's point, I think there are a lot of moving pieces here, and I kind of was pushing people to make decisions on the bonds and the utility stuff today. I think for some time, we've got a few packed meetings coming up. Without this on it, I do not think we'll be ready to make a decision on kind of the exact terms of a seasonal sales tax tonight. But I think this is my hope for this conversation is we can hear a little bit where people are at, and then we'll probably send you all some homework to think about for the next few weeks. Assuming that the body's still interested in this conversation, that we'll have some time to come back to it. So I just wanted to let people know that if you're not feeling comfortable with, if you're still interested in this conversation but aren't ready to, I've been thinking about a schedule that would make it okay if we don't get there quite tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I think something of a difference maybe between, or there's a couple differences I think between this assembly and the previous assembly. And for one, we have almost half the assembly is new, so we have about half the new members. And I think what I like that I'm seeing here is that we have a way to pay for it. We have this seasonal sales tax, and I think that would be, if we're going to do these exemptions, I think that would be a responsible way to do that. I think I am leaning pretty heavily towards one of the options. I'm thinking I'm probably leaning a little heavy towards table 3, where we get where we're able to perhaps offset a mill rate and we're able to exempt food and utilities. So that's where I'm leaning at the moment. I think I do have some follow-up questions for Ms. Flick before I solidify in that position, though.
Deputy Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Where do you went? Ms. Flick, is there a calculator that we can use to like fiddle around with this thing? There's something like that you could send to us, or that I could download on a thumb drive or something?
Deputy Mayor Smith, there is a tool, and I can share that with you. I would want to sit down and really educate you on what you can and can't do with it and what it actually means. So the answer is yes, we have a tool. It is not an easy slider where you can say, what about this? What about that? It takes a bit of working with. And if you would like to do that, perhaps I might suggest we find a time to sit down together and work through scenarios together.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that was your chance to say you're supposed to give us a question and not a statement. Anyway, my question is, on table 3, the revenue increase, how did you guys come up with that number? Why did we settle on that number?
Great question. Mayor Weldon, going back to my disclaimer, these are all numbers I just made up. And so based on, kind of similar to Managers Custer's, how did you come up with 5%? Because it felt palatable. Based on what I felt like I heard in the discussion in April 16th and working through these various scenarios, those were percentages and numbers that felt okay to present to you for discussion. There is an unlimited number of choices of inputs that can be used in any of these.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. And Ms. Hall.
We on to comments or questions or both?
Mayor Weldon, we're still on questions? Or if you have a comment, yeah, questions and comments.
I favor maximizing what we can, to use lack of a better word, extract from the tourist in the summer, and would like to not have our hands tied, with the utilities and all the deferred maintenance. I think we should be looking at increasing revenue from this without, saying exactly, although the food and utilities could definitely be something we look at. But to the point of many of our lower income folks are not paying, they have the SNAP benefits perhaps. So yeah, anyway, it'd be good to see what the public has to say about this, but I think we should let our visitors pay what they can. And yeah, thank you.
I have Mr. Steiniger followed by Mr. Smith.
And this might just be answered by Neil, just go Google it. But Mayor Weldon, you mentioned a survey from several years ago. Can results of that survey be sent to the Assembly so we look at it? Because I'm thinking about the response of not wanting to see an exemption on food and utilities. I'm curious if that was presented as, if we exempt food and utilities, your mill rate's going to go up, or you'll see a reduction in services. Is a much different question in my mind than you don't pay tax on food and utilities and it's coming out of the tourist pocket. And so I'd like to see kind of what those results were and how the questions were phrased.
Thank you, Mr. Steiniger. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess a similar request for staff, because I could Google it too, but I would worry that I'd want someone who, anyway, could we also see what like WIC eligibility and the type of like income limits that applies to? Because I hear you, and at one point I was kind of, anyway, I just want to, I'm sure there's plenty of people that are, definitely very working class and, are struggling and wouldn't meet those eligibility limits. So I think it might be useful for the body, so.
Deputy Mayor Smith would be happy to pull that information. I will, if I may, Chair Bryson. On the tables, I presented food by itself and then food and utility by itself. you can truly interchange the food and the utilities. They have about the same impact. So if there was a desire to say we wanted to exempt utilities, but not food, you could use the food column to get there, just to kind of understand how that goes, because they do have about the same impact on revenue, and the amounts are fairly equitable.
Deputy Mayor Smith, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll just make a comment on kind of where I am generally on this idea. You know, I kind of look at table 3 and I just see, and obviously that's, I'm going to say, missing 1%, you know, hoping and knowing that the voters have supported the 1% historically. But I do see some of those tables. I mean, you know, I'm kind of looking at the far right column of, I personally think I would like to exempt food and utilities. I just see this as a big opportunity to really essentially cut taxes for the residents of this community. And, you know, honestly, I'm kind of like, we hear and we struggle, like, how are we going to pay for utilities? How are we going to fix our schools? How are we going to do all of these things that we know are deferred maintenance? I mean, the list just goes on and on and on and on. So I think, you know, this last column, I don't think 7.5, you know, add 1% onto this last column. I don't think that quite flies. 7.5, 4.5, or you know, something like that. And, you know, some extra revenue, you know, we're being supported by people that are visiting and enjoying our community. And I think, again, one reason I kind of supported kind of embarking on this idea is I feel like our community might be more, you know, it might reduce the tension between, you know, residents and visitors if they are like, you know what, these people are visiting, enjoying my town, and they're helping pay for a number of things that are important for me and my family. So anyway, that's where I am in general, but I'm going to schedule some time with Ms. Flick and make a beautiful tax plan for you all.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Smith. Mayor Weldon, followed by Ms. Atkinson.
So my question would be, again, because we have our seniors exempted from food too, what if we put, is there any way to piece out an exemption for food and utilities at an income level? So not everybody is exempted, but stop down there. Just asking the question. Or is that too difficult to piece out?
Well,
Director Flick.
Mayor Weldon, it is an interesting question. We could do some, I mean, so the answer is, do I have data to support that? No. But could I maybe do some extraction of, like, what do we call a need-based, maybe pull from some federal kind of group guidelines on things and try to figure out how much of our population fits into that aren't already seen? I'm not sure that I can answer that question, but I will definitely do some research and see what we can find out.
Follow up, Mayor Weldon.
Actually, it's a different question. And then if we did seasonal on utilities, is that utilities just for residents or is that utilities for businesses?
Mayor Weldon, there's not a great way to differentiate on the utilities. We could do business versus residential, but there's definitely a lot of gray area in that. So we could work towards that, but I think you'd have folks landing kind of on either side of that line. May not be as clean cut as it sounds.
Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to say that if we start getting into needs-based, as interesting as that is, that could potentially put a burden on people who are collecting the sales tax, trying to determine who qualifies and who doesn't. So just bring that out there. In terms of the discussion of exempting overall, I've heard a couple people refer to the survey, which I think very few people in the Assembly currently have seen. I just want to flag that people who respond to a survey are not necessarily all the people who would be interested in it, and that there is a lot of self-selection even in a really good survey, and a lot of folks who potentially could benefit from a sales tax exemption may not have been able to respond or would have chosen not to respond. So I want to put that out there. And then also, you know, when we're talking about SNAP or WIC, things like that, there's lots of barriers for some folks to getting that, not limited to our state's backlog in the past and currently. So I just want to point out that I do think that there's a lot of reasons to exempt sales tax on food and utilities, even in spite of all those factors.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I have both a comment and a question. I'll start with my comment and just echo what Ms. Atkinson just said. I think when we start getting too granular based off of needs, yeah, I think that places an added burden on the retailers, because I don't think most retailers are going to know how much money somebody makes when they come up to them without maybe an added burden on us to. I don't know. I don't know how we would measure that. My question is kind of a follow-up to the mayor's question. And at the moment, I'm assuming that the utility exemption that we're seeing here, it's not broken down. It's cumulative based off of what is collected for utilities for both residential and commercial. Is that correct?
Assemblymember Kelly, that is correct.
Thank you.
All right, I got a break in the questions. I didn't have a question, but I wanted to throw in my statement, and then we can figure out how we're going to go next. We just scrutinized 5% increase for utilities, and then recognized that a 5% increase is something that is going to have a sticker shock for the citizens of Juneau. I'm not opposed to a seasonal sales tax because I do understand the benefit of having the tourism pay more of the bill. I'll repeat some of the nuances of having local businesses here, that it's not going to be just a really easy transition. The larger you make that sales tax gap, you will be impacting my businesses. You will dictate customer purchases. And like we raise the sales tax in the summer, let's say it's 2% more, and your dryer goes out or your refrigerator goes out. You can't wait. You have to make that purchase during the summertime, paying the additional sales tax. So while I understand trying to extract more sales tax from our tour industry, I think that it's going to have the larger that sales tax gap is, will be the larger the impact is on the community in those businesses where seasonality is important. And we could go down the list of a whole bunch of local businesses that don't deal with tourism that are seasonal businesses. And so I want us to keep that in mind. I'm supportive of some level of increase for the summer, because I totally get extracting more sales tax from the tourists. I just ask you to be very cautious and think of the businesses like mine that could have a negative impact if we do that sales tax gap too large. The other comment I wanted to make was, while I do appreciate that we have new members on the assembly, one of the problems that we had is that if you try to say we're exempting food and sales tax, it was how many millions if we exempted sales tax off all food and all utilities?
Mr. Bryson, it's between $5 and $6 million for each category. So
Okay.
10 to 12 million if you do both.
So 12 million. So a $12 million hole is a large gap to fill, when if we just do a small seasonal increase so that we have additional funds to lower pressure in other areas, it seems like a way better way to go utilizing a seasonal sales tax than if we're trying to fill a $12 million hole. If we just take a little bit of extra sales tax, we can lighten the pressure of what we have to do for our budget. we can create a $12 million hole for ourselves, and no level of seasonal sales tax change is going to make that pressure go away. So that would, thank you for allowing me that extra time as I'm the chair. So we have, we've all given our 2 cents on seasonal sales tax. Do we want to go, Director Flick?
Mr. Bryson, I believe that there was sufficient requests for additional information that staff can work on some of these questions and meet individually with members of the body who want to explore some more. And we can work with Ms. Wool on bringing these pieces back, if that works for you, sir.
Well, let's ask Ms. Wool right now. Ms. Wool.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. That works for me. I think we can probably get together and probably send out a bit of homework to folks so they keep thinking about this over the next few weeks and bring it back in a few weeks after we get through some of our other budget stuff. If no one else has a comment on this topic, I do have another thing on this topic that's a bit of a squirrel, but probably important we talk about tonight. So I'll make sure there isn't any other comments on the topic before I do that, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Did you want to introduce that squirrel tonight, or were you going to wait?
Yeah, I think I do need to introduce a squirrel tonight. And I don't want to catch people off guard, but I sat down with staff in a calendar as we've been thinking about this issue, and I personally think, hearing this conversation tonight, while most people are interested in continuing to tackle this topic, I think if we do put something on the ballot, we need to be pretty proactive about giving it our best shot to getting it to pass. And we talked about the survey that some folks have seen, some haven't. To me, the headline of the survey was, this is a complicated topic that voters need education on. It takes us a long time to understand these things, and voters don't have the time that we have to focus on this. And so I think if we do put this on the ballot, we will want to dedicate some funding to doing some advocacy on seeing it pass. And looking at our calendar, we do not need to make the decision about whether we want to do that tonight, but we need to start the process. We would need to introduce something on May 19th in order to have it ready to get ready for campaigning and such. And so what I would like to move tonight, I'd like to make a motion to ask staff to draft an ordinance that would allow for allocating funding for advocacy associated with a seasonal sales tax and with our taxation as well. There may be a few ballot initiatives that are related to a seasonal sales tax ballot initiatives that are coming through the citizens that we'd have to talk about while we talked about this. And so I've asked staff to I would ask staff to keep it broad so that we can wait and see what happens with seasonal sales tax with the other tax associated ballot initiatives, but get that process moving. I know that you all will need some time to think about whether this is the right move, but to get it on the calendar, I wanted to make that motion tonight to introduce something, and then we'd have some time to talk about it. But I know it's might seem out of left field, so I'm happy to answer any questions or hear people's thoughts on if they do not think that's the right move tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Wool. I had Mr. Smith, Mr. Steiniger. Nope, Mr. Smith's good. Mr. Steiniger.
I'll start with a question. Can Manager Kester Can you explain, without funding for advocacy, what type of information can the city provide and put out into the public about ballot initiatives? Like, and what are the boundaries on, informative information that isn't advocacy?
Yeah, thank you. We could do something very non-biased and educational. Think the ballot initiative for cruise ship, the ship-free Saturdays. We had an FAQ and a posted on our website. We didn't do any presentations. We didn't publish anything. And I recall that I think every one of you hated that FAQ. We're mad about some element of that FAQ. All the members of the public were mad about some element of the FAQ. So I was like, okay, we got it right. We've pissed everybody off with our FAQ. Nobody challenged that as being hey, you're advocating or you're influencing. But it really is that just needs to be fact-based and informative. And I think it gets difficult when you talk about ballot initiatives that have the potential to really change our ability to provide services, right? It's just difficult to maintain that neutrality, but of course we would strive our best.
I have Ms. Atkinson followed by Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we are going along the route of putting this on the ballot this year, then I agree that's a conversation we need to have. I still feel we haven't had a full conversation if the body wants to look at it for this ballot, because I know when we were first talking about it, there were a couple people, including myself, who thought this was not enough lead time. This wasn't time enough to really get it out in the public. This wasn't time to consider all of the many factors that we've discussed today and all the many questions and concerns we have. And I just want to point out, this is a big overhaul in how we do things. And so I just feel like I'm happy to have this discussion if most of the body's like, yes, we need to do it this year. But I would rather have that discussion before we go into this, I guess.
Ms. Atkinson, Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. I appreciate what Ms. Atkinson says, but we might be forced into this decision. But I am for Ms. Wall's motion. As Ms. Kester said, sorry, it's getting a little bit late. Some of these ballot initiatives really affect the way we do business. So I think that we are going to have to advocate for our position and defend some of the things that we do at this time as opposed to other times. So I would be in favor of Ms. Wall's motion.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. Mr. Steiniger. Then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I thought I heard the maker of the motion say, this doesn't need to be decided tonight. I feel like it's a significant decision for the body to, some people not even really realize. My suggestion and desire would be that maybe staff comes back, because I know we've seen memos on what can we do with advocacy and what can't we do and stuff. I mean, we debated this a lot a number of years ago. So I think there's some literature that could come back, and then maybe I'd prefer to not be, and for our other members who didn't have to go through that in the past, maybe give them a break and not make them have to vote on it tonight and come back with some literature and maybe look at it next week or something. Thank you.
Ms. Atkinson.
I know I see your hand up as well, but I have a question for you also, so maybe you can answer both questions. Is your intent with this advocacy potentially for education on seasonal sales tax, or is it advocacy on our position with the other ballot initiatives? Because those are two very different questions for me.
Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. My intent, and I realize it wasn't very clear, is to, and after talking to staff, they said this would be acceptable, to draft something that is broad enough related to advocacy and taxation, that depending on whether this body moves forward with a seasonal sales tax and whether some of these taxation related issues end up on the ballot via citizens initiatives, that our advocacy funds could tackle all or any of those together. And so we would make that decision before a final vote. We would have much more information by then. But right now we have to introduce something by May 19th in order to be ready to do any advocacy at all, according to our calendar. And to Mr. Smith's point, we do not need to vote tonight, but we do need to decide whether to introduce something before May 19th. And so we have, we've got a cow, and I think we've got 2 AFC meetings. Those all have plenty of agenda items on them already, but we do technically have, a few more weeks before we have to decide whether to introduce. But, my intent is to say, introducing is not a decision. It's a step in the process that needs to get done before any of this happens. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Wall. Mayor Weldon.
Okay, I'm a little confused now because it sounds like we could still discuss it next week and be fine. So, Ms. Wall, I didn't know if you wanted to vote tonight or hold it. It sounds
I would like to vote tonight because we've got very packed agendas the next 2 Wednesdays. But technically the last time vote to introduce this, but technically the last time that we could vote to introduce this would be anytime before May 19th.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, Ms. Wall. I move to postpone further discussion on this topic until the May 7th of Assembly Finance Committee meeting. And I'd ask for unanimous consent. Or I just move that because it's probably not going to.
Are there any objections to postponing this discussion? Mr. Kelly, would you like to speak to your objection?
If I'm allowed to, is this a debatable motion?
Is it a debatable motion, sir?
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Wendell.
Just a point of order. There is already a motion on the table. Do we? Okay, thank you.
So Mrs. Wold did not have a motion on the table.
I thought she did.
Ooh, at ease, 1 minute at ease. I'm going to call us back in order. So, Mr. Smith has made a motion to postpone the discussion of the current motion that we have on. Mr. Kelly has made an objection. He can speak to that. You will have an opportunity if you want to speak to whether we're postponing this motion or we're continuing the discussion. If you could keep your statements brief on this so we can keep rolling. Mr. Kelly, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm already ready to vote on this. I think it's I think it couldn't hurt to go ahead and calendar this. We'll have another few weeks between the 19th and June 9th to think about it. Basically we have more than a month as it is. So I'm ready to vote on Ms. Wool's motion to put it on the calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I wanted to object and speak to that as well. As the chair, I had like the best answer for us, and I can't give it until we settle this. So I'll maintain an objection as well. Mayor Weldon.
I will speak in support of Mr. Smith's motion. I understand that there's timeliness, but it sounds like there's questions from the body about what exactly is going on. So I think another week's not going to hurt us.
Ms. Wendell, will you call the roll? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Wall. See.
I'd rather people be informed. If there are people with questions, I actually can't tell, but if there are people, I can't tell if Greg Mr. Smith is doing that for himself or for others, but I'm happy to wait on this if that helps people feel more comfortable.
Thank you, Mr. Wool. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there may be some questions. I think there's some more information. I'm also just kind of in a, maybe let people think and let it simmer and, there's complications on doing it, Anyway, thanks.
I see no hands. We'll call the roll.
Thank you, Chair Bryson. On the motion to postpone the discussion on the current motion made by Ms. Wall. Assemblymember Smith.
Yes.
Assemblymember Kelly.
No.
Assemblymember Steininger.
Yes.
Assemblymember Atkinson.
Yes.
Mayor Walden.
Yes.
Assemblymember Hall.
Yes.
Assemblymember Wall.
Yes.
Chair Bryson.
No.
Motion passes six ayes, 2 nays.
All right. Well, so that pauses the advocacy motion to the 17th. Is that the right meeting? 14th. 7th. All right. Thank you for, I knew there was a 7 in there. So that brings us to agenda topic number 5, the youth activity grant funding.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I actually did have one other either comment or something just on the sales tax topic, and I don't think it'll be a squirrel. And it's just that, you mentioned the business perspective. I think as part of our efforts, the members of the DBA are here, so that is good that they are hearing it, and hopefully maybe something they discuss internally and let us know their position, as well as, the chamber. Who's the chamber liaison? Oh, Ms. Atkinson. Well, if you ever need anyone to go and chat with the chamber, you can call on me. And DBA too. Anyway, but we should do some advocacy because there are impacts on businesses and we should, make sure to hear from them. So I appreciate you raising the issue.
No, thank you for including that, Mr. Smith. Any further questions? Let's go into youth activity grant funding.
Thank you, Chair Bryson. If I can direct your attention to packet page 68, which is a memo from Youth Activity Board Chair outlining their funding, their grant process, their recommendation, and on page 70 has a list of their programs that they're planning to use their funding for. This is brought to the Assembly Finance Committee as part of the budget process every year, and we would be looking for a motion to approve this listing tonight. The funding for it rolls into the larger budget conversation, but that is the information and the action that we're looking for tonight.
All right. Thank you, Director Flick. Questions about the Youth Advisory Board? Mayor Weldon.
See no questions. I can make a motion.
Mayor Weldon.
I move that the Finance Committee approve the funding recommendations of the Youth Activity Board in the attached list and ask for unanimous consent.
You've heard the motion. Are there any objections? So approved. Agenda topic number 6, the FY26 pending list. Director Flick.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Bryson. So as always, there's a couple of informational pieces that are in your packet. So on page 71 of your packet is the pending list. We will spend a bit of time on this next week as we start looking at the manager's proposed increments. And unless there's questions on the pending list at this time, if it's okay with you, Chair Bryson, I will let it is past my bedtime. Let Manager Kester speak for a minute before I talk about the calendar.
Manager Kester.
This is the time I get to talk about spring cleaning? Okay, so I just wanted to let you all know, I know you're going to be in this room a couple more times before May 9th, But May 9th, City Hall will be closed in the afternoon for spring cleaning. We have IT to clean up cords, we're gonna have recycle works, we're gonna have dumpsters. And I'm telling you that because if there's something in this space that you don't want to be cleaned, you can put it in your little drawer, you can take it home, but like, I don't need 3 copies of Robert's Rules of Order. That's something I'm gonna be spring cleaning. So we're just trying to create this building into a place that we can be proud of a little bit, even if it has its faults. So, you can, we won't take things from your drawers.
Order. Let's see, we're almost done, you guys.
So
Thank you for that, Manager Kester.
Thank you. The last informational item, in the supplemental packet, tonight is an updated calendar. And I want to draw your attention to it, because we've moved a couple of things around and I just want to help you be prepared. So, our next meeting is next week, May 7th. And it was really, really full. And understanding that you all will have a very full Monday night at the Committee of the Whole, we wanted to acknowledge the fact that human beings can only do so much for so long, and we tried to pull down our list for the 7th. And so what we've done is we'll cover the manager's proposed increments. We'll talk about capital improvement plan amendments. We do need the school district budget to have an action on it, and we'll have the appropriate language to help guide you on that. And then we moved from the 14th to the 7th, the passenger fee plan, because again, that's just amendments that you might have to it. What we took out of the 7th is Eagle Crest. We just didn't feel like after all of that, then moving into Eagle Crest after you've had a long Monday night would be productive. So we are moving Eagle Crest down to May 14th. After that discussion, unless there's something else that comes up, the intention would be to move to the pending list to start making decisions on the 14th. So the things that need to happen before this budget cycle is done, we need to disposition everything on the pending list, fund it, not fund it, at what level. We need to have you take action on what your mill rate is going to be that's forwarded to the Assembly for action. And along with that, then your final decisions on the items that you had for public hearing tonight. So the CIP resolution, the mill levy ordinance, and the CBJ ordinance. So those will we'll start on the 14th. If we have to go to the 21st, we'll go to the 21st. We take care of it all on the 14th, then we can decide if we need the 21st for any other business that's going on. Thank you, sir.
All right, so that was the budget calendar. Next meeting date is May 7th. Are there any other questions or comments for the good of the order? We're adjourned. Good job, you guys.